I am Alonzo. I am 75 years old, and I raised my autistic grandson alone after my daughter left him on my sofa 11 years ago. Last Thursday, she parked a brand new BMW in my driveway. She did not come to apologize. She came with her new lawyer husband and a court summons to take my grandson away. I thought she finally wanted to be a mother. I was wrong. She just found out the quiet boy she abandoned had quietly sold a piece of software for $5.6 million. Before I tell you how an old Detroit bus dispatcher destroyed a corporate lawyer without throwing a single punch, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you know that blood does not make you family, loyalty does. Now let me take you back to that Thursday afternoon. Detroit gives you a certain kind of quiet when you live on the edges of the city. My house is not a mansion. The paint on the porch is peeling and the driveway has cracks that grow wider every winter. But the mortgage is paid off, and it is a safe place for Jamari. Jamari is 17. He has Asperger's syndrome. The world is too loud for him, so he spends his time making it quiet. He does not like to talk much. He speaks through lines of code. We were sitting on the front porch. I was drinking black coffee, and Jamari was typing on an old laptop I bought from a pawn shop 3 years ago. The boy was tapping the keys with a steady rhythm. Everything was completely peaceful until the roar of an engine broke the silence. A massive, black BMW SUV rolled down our street and turned into my cracked driveway. The heavy tires crushed the dead leaves. I set my coffee mug down on the wooden railing. Jamari stopped typing. He closed his laptop and pushed his chair back into the shadows of the porch. He hates unexpected visitors. I stood up, feeling the familiar ache in my 75-year-old knees. The driver's side door opened first. A tall white man stepped out. He was wearing a tailored gray suit that cost more than my first car. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He looked at my house with a sneer of pure disgust. Then the passenger door opened. It was Nia, my daughter, the mother of the boy hiding behind me. I had not seen her in 11 years. 11 years ago, she walked into my living room with a 6-year-old boy dragging a small Spider-Man suitcase. She told me she wanted to go to a party for the weekend and needed me to watch him. She walked out the door and changed her phone number. She never came back. I spent a decade working double shifts at the city bus terminal to pay for Jamari and his therapy while she lived her life somewhere else. Now she was standing in my driveway, wearing a designer trench coat and oversized sunglasses. She took off the glasses. She did not look at me with regret. She looked at me with cold calculation. "Hello, Dad," she said. Her voice was flat. I did not invite her up the stairs. I stood at the top step looking down at them. "You are lost." "Nia," I said. "The highway is back the way you came." She sighed heavily, acting like I was the one being unreasonable. "Dad, stop it," she said. "We are not here to fight with you. I am here for my son. Where is he?" I shifted my weight, blocking her view of Jamari. "You do not have a son," I told her. "You have a memory of a boy you threw away. That boy is 17 now. He does not know you." The man in the expensive suit stepped forward. He did not introduce himself politely. He looked at me like I was a stray dog blocking his path. "Listen, old man," he said. "My name is Trent. I am Nia's husband, and I am a senior partner at a very reputable law firm. We are not here to negotiate with you. We are here to serve you." Trent reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the porch. It landed right next to my boots. "That is a family court summons," Trent said with a smug smile. "We have already filed an emergency petition for full legal and physical custody of Jamari." I looked down at the envelope and then back up at Nia. "You cannot be serious," I said. "You left him here because you said he was broken. You said you could not handle the meltdowns, the doctors, the silence. Now you show up with a lawyer to take him. A judge will laugh you out of the courtroom." Nia crossed her arms over her expensive coat. "Dad, you are 75 years old," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You are a retired bus dispatcher living in a crumbling house. Jamari has special needs. You are too old and too uneducated to give him the care he requires. It is time for him to be with his real parents. Trent and I have a 6-bedroom house we can provide for him." Provide for him, I repeated. The anger was rising in my chest, but I kept my voice perfectly calm. I provided for him when he needed specialized sensory therapy that cost $400 a week. I provided for him when he could not sleep for 3 days straight. Where were you? You did not even send a Christmas card. Trent stepped closer, resting his hand on the porch railing. He looked me up and down. Past performance does not guarantee future results, Alonzo. The point is, the boy needs sophisticated care. He needs financial management. You are completely out of your depth. I frowned. Financial management, I asked. He is a teenager. He eats oatmeal and writes computer code all day. He does not need a hedge fund manager. Key. Trent and Nia exchanged a look. It was a look of pure predatory triumph. Trent reached into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a glossy magazine. It was a recent issue of a major tech and finance publication. He threw it onto the stairs. "Pick it up," Alonzo Trent said. I slowly walked down one step and picked up the magazine. There was a yellow sticky note pointing to a short article on page 40. I read the headline. Apex Dynamics acquires independent noise filtering algorithm for $5.6 million. I read the small print underneath. The software was developed by an anonymous independent coder known only by the handle Echo J Jamari. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew Jamari was smart. I knew he was building something to help block out the frequencies that bothered his ears. But $5.6 million. The number felt entirely unreal. I looked up at Nia. She was smiling. It was the ugliest smile I had ever seen on my own child. "You are right, Dad," she said. "He does write code all day, and he just sold a piece of it to one of the biggest tech firms in the country. He is a minor with a severe cognitive disability. By law, he cannot manage that money. We are his legal guardians. We will be managing his estate from now on." The pieces clicked together in my mind perfectly. They did not want the boy. They wanted the asset. Nia had probably seen a news alert or heard through the grapevine about a kid from Detroit selling an app. She put the pieces together and brought her slick lawyer husband to orchestrate a legal heist. "You are not taking him," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I will fight you until my last breath." Trent laughed out loud. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Fight us with what, Alonzo? Your pension. I bill $700 an hour. By the time I am done burying you in legal paperwork, you will not even be able to afford the property taxes on this dump." Trent turned around and walked back toward the BMW. Nia lingered for a moment. She looked past me, trying to catch a glimpse of Jamari. "Pack his things, Dad," she said. "We have a court date on Monday. Do not make this harder than it has to be." She turned and followed her husband. They got into the luxury SUV and backed out of my driveway, leaving tire marks on the concrete. I stood there holding the magazine. The $5.6 million headline burned into my eyes. I heard a creak behind me. Jamari stepped out of the shadows. He did not say a word. He just looked at the envelope on the floor, and then looked at me. His hands were shaking slightly. I walked back up the stairs and put my hand firmly on his shoulder. "I am right here, son," I said. "They are not taking you anywhere." But as I watched that BMW turn the corner, I knew the truth. Trent was right about one thing. I could not fight him with money. I could not fight him in a traditional courtroom battle where he knew all the judges and all the loopholes. He was a shark and I was bleeding in the water. I realized right then that if I wanted to save my grandson, I had to stop playing by their rules. I had to let them think they were winning. I had to let them think I was just a tired old man who did not understand how the modern world worked. Because what Trent and Nia did not understand was that when you back an old wolf into a corner, he does not just bite. He waits for you to step into the trap. I picked up the court summons and went inside the house. It was time to go to work. The sun came up over Detroit, looking exactly like it did the day before, but everything in my house felt entirely different. I did not sleep. I spent the entire night sitting in my worn armchair listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet clicking of Jamari typing on his keyboard down the hall. He did not sleep either. The visit from his mother and that slick suit lawyer had disturbed his equilibrium. For a boy like Jamari, routine is not just a preference, it is the only thing keeping the chaos of the world at bay. When you disrupt his routine, you disrupt his mind. At 7 a.m, I finally got up. My knees popped loudly in the quiet house. I walked into the kitchen and started making oatmeal. Plain oatmeal with a dash of cinnamon, just the way he likes it. I set the bowl on the dining table and knocked twice on his bedroom door. He came out 10 minutes later wearing the exact same clothes from yesterday. He did not look at me. He sat down and began to eat with slow, deliberate movements. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat across from him. I need to run to the pharmacy this morning, son, I told him. I need to pick up your sensory medication and pay Dr. Evans for your therapy sessions this month. I will be back in an hour. Keep the doors locked. He tapped the side of his bowl twice. That meant he understood. I grabbed my coat and my keys. Jamari takes a very specific medication to help regulate his nervous system. It takes the edge off the sensory overload. It is not cheap. It costs nearly $300 a month, even with my retirement insurance. Add the weekly sessions with his behavioral therapist, and it takes up almost half of my pension. But I never complained. It was the cost of keeping my grandson safe and functional. I drove my old Ford pickup down to the corner pharmacy. The morning air was biting cold, typical for early spring in the city. Inside the pharmacy, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I walked up to the counter and greeted Sarah, the pharmacist, who had been filling Jamari prescriptions for the past 5 years. She smiled warmly and handed me the small white paper bag. "That will be $285, Alonzo," she said, punching the numbers into the register. I pulled out my worn leather wallet and handed her my bank debit card. It was the same card I used every month, the same account where my pension was deposited. She swiped the card through the machine. The machine beeped a flat, dull tone. Sarah frowned and looked at the screen. "That is weird," she murmured. "It says declined. Let me try it again." She wiped the magnetic strip on her apron and swiped it a second time. The same flat beep. Declined. My stomach gave a slow, heavy lurch. I knew I had at least $1,400 in that checking account. My pension had just cleared on Tuesday. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice remaining perfectly level. "The machine might be acting up." Sarah looked up at me with apologetic eyes. "I am sorry, Alonzo. It is giving me a hard decline code. It usually means the bank has placed a hold on the account. Do you want to call them?" I stared at the small white bag on the counter. Inside were the pills that kept my grandson from tearing his own hair out when the lights got too bright. I reached into my pocket, but I knew what was there. I did not have $200 in cash. "I will be right back, Sarah," I said quietly. "Hold it for me." I walked out of the pharmacy and got back into my truck. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The leather was cold against my palms. I did not panic. Panic is a luxury for people who have someone else to save them. I drove straight to the local branch of my bank 3 blocks away. The bank had just opened. I walked past the line at the teller counter and went straight to the desk of the branch manager. His name was David. He was a good man who had helped me refinance my mortgage a few years back when the roof caved in. He looked up from his computer as I sat down in the chair across from him. "Alonzo," he said, looking surprised. "Good to see you. What brings you in so early?" "My debit card was just declined at the pharmacy, David," I said. "I need you to tell me why. My pension cleared on Tuesday. The money is there." David smiled reassuringly and started typing on his keyboard. "Let me take a look. Sometimes our fraud prevention system flags routine purchases if there is a glitch in the server. Give me 1 second. I sat perfectly still watching his face. I watched his eyes scan the computer monitor. I watched the friendly smile slowly slide right off his face. The color drained from his cheeks. He stopped typing. He swallowed hard. "Alonzo," he started, his voice suddenly very quiet and very formal. "Have you spoken to a lawyer recently?" The knot in my stomach tightened into a fist of pure ice. "No," I said. "Why?" David turned his monitor slightly toward me, though I could not read the small text. He looked incredibly uncomfortable. "Alonzo, your checking account, your savings account, and the small college trust fund you set up for Jamari, they have all been frozen. Completely locked down." "Frozen," I repeated. "By who? On what authority?" David let out a heavy breath. "An emergency injunction was filed at 8 o'clock this morning by a judge in the state family court. The order was executed by a law firm downtown. The lead attorney is a man named Trent. But the injunction is not just a standard freeze, Alonzo. It is a protective order. A protective order against what I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Against you," David said, looking at me with genuine pity. "The document cites severe allegations. It accuses you of elderly financial exploitation. It claims you are using a disabled minor for financial gain, and that your accounts must be frozen immediately to protect the child's assets pending a full custody and financial audit." The sheer audacity of the lie hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Elderly financial exploitation. I was the elderly one. I was the one who had spent every dime I ever made keeping that boy fed, clothed, and in therapy while his mother was out living a carefree life. They had flipped the narrative. They had gone to a judge who saw a slick white lawyer representing a supposedly concerned mother, and they had painted me as an abusive old thief trying to steal from a disabled kid. They knew Jamari had sold his code. They knew the $5.6 million was floating out there. And Trent knew exactly how the legal system worked. He knew that the moment you allege financial abuse of a vulnerable minor, the courts do not ask questions. They freeze everything first and ask questions later. It was a preemptive strike. He was cutting off my air supply. "How long, David?" I asked, keeping my face completely blank. "How long until I can access my pension? The money I worked 40 years for." David shook his head sadly. "With an injunction like this, Alonzo, it could take weeks, maybe months. You will have to go to court and prove that the funds in this account are entirely yours and not commingled with any income generated by Jamari. Until a judge lifts this order, my hands are completely tied. I cannot even give you a $10 withdrawal. I am so sorry." I stood up slowly. "Thank you, David. I know this is not your fault." I walked out of the bank. The automatic sliding doors opened and the cold Detroit air hit my face. I walked to my truck and leaned against the door. I pulled out my worn leather wallet and opened it. I counted the bills inside. A 20, 2 10s, 2 singles. $42. That was everything I had in the world. $42. I leaned my head back against the cold metal of the truck. My mind began to calculate the brutal mathematics of survival. We had enough food in the pantry for maybe 5 days. The electricity bill was already paid for the month. But then a realization hit me so hard it made my knees physically weak. Friday. Today was Wednesday. On Friday, my property tax payment was due to the county. It was a bill for $1,200. I always paid it on time with my pension. If I missed the deadline, the county would put a lien on the house. Within a few weeks, they could initiate foreclosure proceedings. Suddenly, the sheer brilliance of Trent's strategy became terrifyingly clear. He did not just freeze my accounts to stop me from hiring a good lawyer. He froze my accounts so I would default on the property taxes. He wanted me to lose the house. If I lost the house, I would be a 75-year-old man with no money and no permanent residence. When we finally went to family court for the custody hearing, Trent would stand in front of the judge in his bespoke suit. He would point at me and say, "Look at this man, Your Honor. He is broke. He is homeless. He cannot even provide shelter for this severely autistic child. My wife and I have a massive house and a massive bank account. The choice is obvious." Trent was not just trying to take Jamari. He was actively destroying my entire existence. He was suffocating my survival. He wanted me broken, homeless, and humiliated before he took the only family I had left. I closed my wallet and put it back in my pocket. I looked down the street toward the pharmacy where Jamari's medication was still sitting on the counter out of my reach. I looked at the bank where 40 years of my hard work were locked away behind a legal firewall. They thought I would break. They thought a retired bus dispatcher from Detroit would just fold up and cry when the system turned against him. They thought I would call Nia begging for mercy. I unlocked my truck and climbed inside. I did not turn the key right away. I sat in the driver's seat and let the cold anger harden into something sharp and precise. Trent had used the law as a weapon to strip me of everything. He thought the law was his private playground, but he forgot that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. I was not going to beg. I was going to tear his life apart piece by piece. I started the engine and put the truck in drive. I had $42 to my name, and it was time to go to work. I sat in the dark living room for hours. The sun went down over Detroit, and the shadows stretched long and heavy across the worn floorboards. I did not turn on the lamps. Electricity costs money, and when you only have $42 to your name, you learn very quickly to live in the dark. Down the narrow hallway, I could hear the faint but steady clicking of Jamari's keyboard. He was in his room, his safe space, completely unaware that the walls of our lives were rapidly closing in. The sound of his typing was like a metronome. It kept my heart beating at a steady pace while my mind tried to solve an impossible puzzle. I had exactly $42 in my pocket. The property tax bill sitting on the kitchen counter was $1,200. Friday was the absolute deadline. It was a mathematical impossibility. Trent had engineered this trap perfectly. He knew my pension was the only thing keeping this house afloat. He knew that without it, the county would step in. He was not just trying to take my grandson away from me. He was actively trying to make me homeless. He wanted to make sure that when we finally stood in front of a judge, I would look like a broken, destitute old man who could not even keep a roof over his own head. The silence in the house was heavy, pressing down on my chest. Then my old cell phone vibrated on the coffee table. The sudden buzzing noise cut through the quiet, making me flinch. The screen lit up, casting a pale blue glow across the dark room. It was an unfamiliar number with a wealthy suburban area code. I knew exactly who it was before I even picked it up. I did not reach for it immediately. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3 times. You never answer on the first ring when you are dealing with predators. It shows weakness. It shows desperation. On the 4th ring, I slowly picked it up and pressed the cold plastic to my ear. I did not say hello. I just breathed, listening to the dead air on the line. "Dad," a voice said. It was Nia. Her tone was completely different from the cold, arrogant attitude she had displayed on my front porch just 24 hours ago. Now her voice sounded soft. It sounded like she was forcing herself to be compassionate. She was playing the role of a deeply concerned daughter. "Are you there, Dad?" she asked. "Yes, I am here," I said, my voice flat and low. I heard a deep, dramatic sigh on the other end of the line. She was playing a part. She was reading a script that her slick lawyer husband had probably written out for her. "Dad, I have been thinking about you all day," she said. "I know you went to the bank this morning. I know you found out about the frozen accounts. I am calling because it breaks my heart to see you struggling. I want to help you." I did not interrupt her. I did not tell her that she was the reason my accounts were frozen in the first place. I let her speak because when liars talk, they eventually reveal their true motives. "I am listening," I said. Nia cleared her throat. She sounded so reasonable, so perfectly logical. "Look, Dad," she continued, "Trent is a very powerful lawyer. He has the entire legal system backing him up. The emergency injunction he filed today is just the beginning. The family court judges downtown know him. They respect him. When we go to the custody hearing next week, it is going to be absolutely brutal for you. They are going to look deep into your finances. They are going to see that you are living paycheck to paycheck on a fixed income. They will say you are unfit to manage a disabled minor with a multi-million-dollar asset. They might even try to put Jamari in a temporary state facility while the trial drags on for months." I gripped the armrest of my chair until my knuckles ached. The mention of a state facility made my blood run completely cold. She was using my deepest, most primal fear against me. A state facility would destroy a boy like Jamari. The bright lights, the unpredictable noises, the lack of routine, it would break his mind within days. She knew this. She was holding a knife to the most vulnerable part of my soul. "So, what is the offer, Nia?" I asked, cutting straight through her fake sympathy. "You did not call to warn me. You called to make a deal. Get to the point." She dropped the sweet act just a fraction of an inch. "We can make this extremely easy for everyone, Dad," she said, her voice turning brisk and businesslike. "Trent has drafted a voluntary relinquishment of guardianship form. All you have to do is sign it. If you sign over full physical custody and legal rights to us tonight, Trent will call the judge first thing in the morning. He will have the freeze lifted from your personal pension account immediately. You will get your money back before noon. And Trent even agreed that we will not force the sale of your house. We will let you keep the old place. You can pay your property taxes. You can live out your retirement in peace." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Think about it, Dad," she whispered. "You get your money back, you keep your home, and you do not have to worry about the heavy burden of caring for a severely disabled boy anymore. You are tired, you deserve to rest. It is a win for everyone. It is a win for everyone." Those words echoed in the dark, empty room. I closed my eyes. They were offering me my own money and my own house in exchange for my flesh and blood. It was a pure, ruthless extortion disguised as a merciful act of charity. Trent had starved me just enough to make a single crumb look like a massive feast. He wanted me to trade Jamari for survival. But as I sat there in the dark, listening to her breathe on the other end of the line, my mind began to calculate a different equation. Trent was a very powerful corporate lawyer, yes. He had money and he had influence. But if he was so absolutely certain that he would win in a courtroom, why were they calling me in the middle of the night to make a desperate deal? Powerful people do not make deals unless they are secretly afraid of the fight. They wanted a quick surrender because they needed that $5.6 million immediately. They did not have the time or the patience for a drawn-out legal battle. They were in a rush. And in my experience, desperation is the greatest weakness a person can have. Nia spoke again, her voice tight with growing impatience. "So what do you say, Dad? I can have a legal courier drop the papers off at your house in less than an hour. Just sign them and this nightmare is over." I did not yell. I did not curse at her. I did not tell her that she was a monster for selling out her own child. Anger is a waste of energy, and I needed all my energy for what was coming next. I leaned forward in the dark. "Nia," I said softly, "what is Jamara's favorite food?" The line went dead silent. The sudden question caught her completely off guard. What Nia asked sounding confused and annoyed. "What does that have to do with anything, Dad? We are talking about legal documents. I asked you a very simple question," I replied, my voice completely steady and unyielding. "You want to be his full-time mother. You want to manage his daily life, his health, and his millions of dollars. Tell me what his favorite food is." I could hear her stammering. I could hear her putting her hand over the receiver and whispering frantically to Trent in the background. I waited. The silence stretched out for 10 long seconds. "It is pizza," she finally said, her voice lacking any real confidence. "All teenagers like pizza. Pepperoni pizza, right? I will buy him the best pizza in the city." I looked down the dark hallway toward Jamara's closed door. For 11 long years, I had made him plain oatmeal with a dash of cinnamon every single morning. It was the only texture he could handle when he woke up. If you gave him a hot, greasy slice of pepperoni pizza, the strong smell and the oily texture would send him into a massive sensory meltdown. He would rock back and forth and scream until his throat was raw. "He does not eat pizza." "Nia?" I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "He absolutely hates pizza." The silence on the phone grew heavy and suffocating. "You do not know him," I said quietly. "You do not know what makes him smile when he is alone. You do not know what terrifies him in the middle of the night. You do not know the boy at all. You just know the number in his bank account." I pulled the phone away from my ear. "Dad, wait!" Nia yelled, her voice suddenly frantic and losing all its fake composure. "If you do not sign these papers, Trent will completely destroy you. You will die homeless in the street." I hovered my thumb over the red end call button. "Bring your shovel," I whispered into the receiver. And then I hung up. I dropped the phone back onto the wooden coffee table. The screen went black. The darkness returned to the room. But I was not afraid of the dark anymore. They had the money, they had the law, but they did not have the truth. They did not know the boy. That was their massive blind spot. That was the fatal crack in their expensive armor. And I was going to tear that crack wide open. I stood up from my chair and walked into the kitchen. I opened the pantry and pulled out the canister of rolled oats. We were going to need a lot of energy for tomorrow. The war had officially moved past the front porch. It was time to fight back. The Wayne County Family Court building is a massive concrete block that smells like floor wax and old desperation. I walked through the metal detectors at 8 in the morning. My stomach was completely empty. I had exactly $42 in my pocket and a court-appointed public defender waiting for me on the 3rd floor. His name was Miller. He looked like a man who had not slept a full night since the late 90s. His suit was severely wrinkled, his tie was crooked, and he was carrying a massive stack of manila folders that looked like they were about to spill all over the hallway floor. He shook my hand and his palm was cold and sweating. He told me he had reviewed my case file for exactly 10 minutes on the subway ride to work. That is the moment I knew I was walking into a slaughterhouse. We walked into courtroom 3B. The room was aggressively bright with humming fluorescent lights. The wooden benches were hard and uncomfortable. Sitting at the plaintiff's table was Trent. He was wearing a navy blue custom-tailored suit today, with a silk tie that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Nia sat next to him wearing a conservative beige dress. Her hair was pulled back neatly to make her look like a responsible, loving suburban mother. She was already holding a crumpled tissue in her hand, preparing for her theatrical performance. The judge walked in a few minutes later. Her name was Judge Harrison. She had stern eyes and a severe, no-nonsense demeanor. She looked down at me and my exhausted public defender with a gaze that felt entirely dismissive. Then she looked over at Trent, and her expression softened just a fraction of an inch. It was a very subtle shift, but when you have lived 75 years as a black man in this country, you know exactly what that look means. The game was entirely rigged before the first word was even spoken. Trent stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. He did not speak loud. He spoke with the calm, authoritative voice of a man who owned the room. "Your Honor," he said, "Jamari is a 17-year-old boy with severe Asperger's syndrome. He is a profoundly gifted but highly vulnerable child. For the past 11 years, he has been living in conditions that can only be described as hazardous and abusive." Trent walked over to a small projector on the table and turned it on. An image flashed onto the blank white wall behind the judge's bench. I felt a cold, heavy tightness grip my chest. The picture was of Jamara's bedroom. It had been taken through the window from the outside in the middle of the night. Trent had sent a private investigator to my house. The picture showed exactly what a brilliant autistic coder's room looks like. There were thick, tangled power cables running across the floor. There were 3 disassembled laptops on the desk with their green motherboards exposed. And there was a plain mattress on the floor because Jamari hates the creaking sound of a wooden bed frame. To me, it was the sanctuary of a genius. It was a space perfectly tailored to keep his mind calm. To a judge who did not understand autism, it looked like a complete nightmare. "Look at this environment, Your Honor," Trent said, his voice dripping with manufactured disgust. "This is not a home. This is a dungeon. The respondent, Alonzo, is a severe hoarder. He has locked this disabled minor in a room filled with dangerous electrical fire hazards. He has isolated the boy entirely from the outside world. And why? Because this poor disabled child possesses an extraordinary talent for writing complex computer code." Trent paused, letting the heavy silence fill the courtroom. He turned slowly to look directly at me. "Alonzo is not a loving grandfather. He is a warden. He discovered that this boy could create highly lucrative software, and he locked him away to harvest his intellectual property. We are talking about an algorithm worth over $5 million. This old man is exploiting a disabled minor for massive financial gain while denying him a safe, clean living environment and proper maternal care." My public defender stood up slowly. He fumbled with his papers and stammered over his words. "Your Honor, my client has raised the boy alone for 11 years, he said weakly. "There is no proof of any financial exploitation. The boy just likes computers." The judge held up her hand and cut him off completely. She did not want to hear from a tired man with a wrinkled suit. She wanted to hear from the weeping mother. Nia took the witness stand. She was an absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation. She cried, but not too much, just enough to let a single perfect tear roll down her cheek. She told the judge that she had made some minor mistakes when she was young, but she had completely turned her life around. She boldly claimed she had been trying to contact Jamari for years, but I had ruthlessly blocked her phone calls and threatened her with physical violence. She said she lay awake every single night worrying about her baby boy living in absolute squalor. She looked at the judge with wide, pleading eyes and begged her to let her bring her son to her beautiful 6-bedroom home in the suburbs, where he would have a real bed, a clean room, and the professional medical care he desperately needed. It was a beautiful story. It was also entirely fiction, but the judge was swallowing every single word of it without question. The judge looked down at her notes and adjusted her glasses. She did not even ask me to speak. She did not ask me about the countless nights I stayed awake holding the boy when the world was too loud for him to handle. She did not ask me about the plain oatmeal with cinnamon I made for him every single morning. She looked at the projected picture of the exposed wires and she made her final decision. "This court finds the living conditions presented by the plaintiff to be highly disturbing," she said, her voice echoing coldly off the wood-paneled walls. "Given the substantial financial assets recently generated by the minor and the clear lack of a suitable environment provided by the current guardian, immediate intervention is absolutely required. I am granting emergency, temporary physical and legal custody to the biological mother Nia and her husband Trent." The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach, but I did not blink. I stared straight ahead, keeping my face completely blank. The judge was not finished destroying my life. Furthermore, she continued looking down at me with pure disdain, pending a full and thorough investigation into the severe allegations of financial exploitation. "I am stripping Alonzo of all guardianship rights effective immediately. You are ordered to vacate the premises of the child. I am issuing a temporary restraining order. You are not to come within 100 yards of Jamari, Nia, or Trent. If you violate this order, you will be arrested and jailed immediately. Do you understand?" I looked up at the judge. I looked over at Trent, who was desperately trying to hide a massive, triumphant smirk. I looked at Nia, who was dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with her crumpled tissue. "I understand," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. I stood up from the hard wooden bench. My public defender was apologizing to me in a panicked whisper, but I did not hear a single word he said. I turned around and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind me with a loud echoing thud. They had taken my grandson. They had taken my legal rights. They had bound my hands with a court-ordered restraining order. They thought they had won the entire war in a single morning. But as I walked out of that massive courthouse and stepped back into the cold, bitter Detroit air, I was not thinking about defeat. I was thinking about how much harder a man falls when he truly believes he is completely untouchable. Trent had won the sterile environment of the courtroom, but he had just dragged this fight out into the harsh reality of the streets. And out here, I am the one who makes the rules. The drive back from the courthouse was a blur of gray concrete and cold Detroit wind. I did not turn on the radio. I just gripped the steering wheel of my old pickup truck and listened to the steady hum of the engine. The judge had given them the order. I knew they would not wait a single day. People like Trent do not give you time to breathe or say goodbye. They strike fast to keep you off balance. By the time I turned onto my street, my suspicions were completely confirmed. The flashing red and blue lights were already reflecting off the windows of my neighbors' houses. 2 Detroit police cruisers were parked at sharp angles, completely blocking my cracked driveway. The massive black BMW was idling right behind them. They had driven straight from the courtroom to my front door. They brought the police because they wanted a show of absolute force. They wanted to make sure I knew exactly who held the power. I parked my truck on the street a few houses down and began to walk slowly toward my own home. I could feel the eyes of my neighbors watching from behind their curtains. I did not look at them. I kept my eyes fixed on the front porch. Before I could even reach the edge of my own grass, a young police officer stepped directly into my path. He had his hand resting casually on his heavy-duty belt. He held up his other hand, signaling me to stop right where I was. "Alonzo," he said, reading my name off a metal clipboard. "I need you to stay right there. We have a signed court order from Judge Harrison. You are legally required to remain 100 yards away from the minor and his biological parents. If you take one more step toward that property, I will place you in handcuffs and you will go to jail." I looked at the young officer. His face was blank, just doing his job following the paper. He did not know the history. He did not know that I had bought that house with blood and sweat. He did not know the boy inside. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice or beg for a chance to pack my grandson's clothes. I simply stopped walking. I took 2 steps backward until my boots were standing on the cracked concrete of the public sidewalk across the street. I crossed my arms over my chest. I was forced to become a silent spectator to the destruction of my own family. The front door of my house opened wide. The second police officer walked out onto the porch. Right behind him was Jamari. My chest tightened so hard I felt like my ribs were going to crack, but I forced my face to remain completely, perfectly still. They had pulled him right out of his bedroom. He was wearing his gray sweatpants and a faded graphic t-shirt. He did not have his heavy weighted blanket. He did not have his noise-canceling headphones. They had dragged him out into the cold, unfiltered world without any of his armor. I could see the panic radiating from his entire body. His breathing was rapid and shallow. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving up and down. He was walking on his tiptoes, which is exactly what he does when the sensory input becomes too much for his brain to process. His dark eyes were wide and terrified, darting frantically around the yard, unable to focus on any single object. The bright, flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers were blinding his sensitive eyes. The loud crackle of the police radios was echoing in his ears like physical blows. He was experiencing a massive total sensory overload, and the people who claimed they were saving him were the exact ones causing his torture. Nia stepped out from the shadow of the porch. She had taken off her designer coat and was playing her role for the police officers perfectly. She put on a facial expression of deep maternal concern. "Oh, my poor sweet baby," she cooed, stepping down the stairs and rushing toward him. She opened her arms wide, intending to pull him into a tight, dramatic embrace. She did not know him at all. She did not know that light, unpredictable touches feel like burning fire against his skin when he is stressed. As soon as her manicured hands brushed his shoulders, Jamari flinched violently. It was a massive, visceral reaction. He pulled back so hard he almost tripped over the bottom step of the porch. He let out a sharp, guttural sound of pure distress, wrapping his own arms tightly around his chest, trying to protect himself from her touch. He squeezed his eyes shut and began to rock back and forth on his heels. Nia's face flushed a dark, angry red. The loving mother facade cracked for just a fraction of a second, revealing the cold irritation hiding underneath. She looked quickly at the police officers and offered a fake, nervous smile. "He is just confused right now," she lied, smoothing her hair. "He will be much better once we get him home and get him settled." Then Trent walked out of my house. He was carrying Jamari's old faded canvas duffel bag. It was the same bag I used to pack his clothes when we took weekend fishing trips to the lake. Trent held the bag away from his expensive navy blue suit like it was covered in toxic waste. He walked down the porch steps with an arrogant swagger. He walked over to the back of the BMW, popped the trunk, and carelessly threw the duffel bag inside. Trent turned around and looked across the street directly at me. He had the temporary custody papers rolled up tightly in his hand like a weapon. He did not yell because the police officers were standing right there, but the smug, triumphant smirk on his face spoke louder than any words. He looked at my worn boots. He looked at my old truck. He looked at my empty hands. He thought he had completely broken me. He thought he was looking at a sad, helpless old man who had just lost the only thing that mattered to him. I stared right back at him, keeping my eyes dead and cold. The first police officer gently nudged Jamari toward the back passenger door of the luxury car. The boy was shaking uncontrollably now. His entire world, his safe routine, his quiet sanctuary had been violently inverted in the span of a few hours. The officer opened the heavy car door. But as Jamari reached the edge of the seat, he stopped. He stopped rocking. He stopped hyperventilating for one brief, crucial moment. He turned his head slowly and looked across the street, right past the flashing lights, right past his mother, right past the arrogant lawyer. He looked directly into my eyes. The rest of the world faded into absolute silence. It was just me and the boy. Oh, Jamari raised his right hand slightly, keeping it low by his side. He rested his palm against his own thigh. He extended his index finger. He looked at me, keeping unbroken eye contact. He tapped his leg 3 times in quick succession, then he paused for 1 full second. Then he tapped his leg 2 more times. My heart stopped beating. 3 taps. A pause. 2 taps. It was Morse code. Years ago, a massive winter blizzard had knocked out the power grid in our neighborhood for 5 straight days. The house was freezing and completely dark. The sudden change in routine and the pitch-black darkness terrified Jamari. To keep him calm, to give his brilliant mind a pattern to focus on, I taught him Morse code by tapping on the wooden kitchen table by candlelight. We practiced it until it became a secret language just between the two of us. 3 taps meant wait. 2 taps meant I hear you. The message was crystal clear. Wait. He was not broken. He was not a helpless victim being dragged away into the dark. Behind those panicked eyes, his mind was running 1,000 miles an hour. He was telling me that he understood exactly what was happening. He was telling me to hold my ground. He was telling me to wait for his signal. I looked at my grandson and I gave him one single, slow, deliberate nod. He saw it. A tiny fraction of the wild terror left his dark eyes. He lowered his head, pulled his arms tight against his chest, and climbed into the back seat of the leather-lined car. The officer pushed the heavy door shut, sealing Jamari inside with the enemy. Trent got into the driver's seat, adjusting his expensive tie in the mirror. Nia climbed into the passenger side, pulling her sunglasses down over her eyes. The BMW engine roared to life and pulled smoothly away from the curb. The 2 police cruisers turned off their flashing lights and followed the luxury car slowly out of the neighborhood. Within minutes, the street was completely quiet again. The Detroit wind blew a discarded newspaper across my front lawn. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, staring at the empty driveway. Trent thought he had won the game by using a judge to change the locks and steal the prize. He thought he had driven away with a helpless cash cow. He had absolutely no idea that he had just locked himself inside a moving cage with a digital Trojan horse. I turned around and walked slowly back toward my empty house. I was not sad anymore. The grieving period was officially over. The old bus dispatcher was gone. The hunt had begun. I did not have to be inside the luxury downtown condo to know exactly how the first 48 hours played out. When a boy with Asperger's syndrome has a photographic memory, he can recall every single detail with terrifying accuracy. He told me everything later, and the corporate server logs filled in the rest of the story. Let me paint you a picture of what happens when arrogant people try to put a collar on a mind they do not understand. They brought Jamari to a penthouse overlooking the Detroit River. It was a completely sterile environment, white leather couches, glass tables, and cold marble floors. There was nothing soft in that apartment, nothing safe. Just the smell of expensive chemical cleaners and the heavy cologne that Trent wore. They led Jamari into a spare bedroom that looked like a high-end hotel suite. It had a massive flat-screen television and a bed that was far too large and far too soft. To them, it was luxury. To Jamari, it was a sensory nightmare. He sat down on the edge of the mattress and pulled his knees tightly to his chest. He did not unpack his faded canvas bag. He just stared at the blank white wall across the room. Trent did not care about the comfort of a frightened boy. Trent only cared about the finish line. He had successfully manipulated a family court judge, and he had the golden goose sitting right in his spare bedroom. But there was a massive problem that Trent had not anticipated. You cannot just steal a flash drive and walk away with $5.6 million in the modern tech industry. Intellectual property deals of that magnitude require secure integration. The buyer Apex Dynamics needed the original creator to log into their secure corporate server and manually integrate the final piece of the algorithm. They needed Jamari to press the button. Trent knew this. He walked into the spare bedroom holding a brand new silver laptop. He placed it on the glass desk next to the bed. He smiled a fake, greasy smile. "Just log in, buddy," Trent said, his voice dripping with forced friendliness. "Just type in your little password and send the files to the corporate servers. Once we do that, we can go buy you whatever video games you want." Jamari did not look at the laptop. He did not look at Trent. He kept his eyes locked firmly on the blank white wall. He went completely, entirely nonverbal. When the world becomes entirely unsafe, Jamari retreats into the fortress of his own mind. He built a wall of absolute silence that neither Trent nor Nia could penetrate. Nia tried to play the role of the loving mother. She went out and brought him plates of expensive takeout food, gourmet pasta, high-end sushi, and organic roasted chicken. Jamari ignored all of it. He needed his plain oatmeal with cinnamon, but Nia did not know that, and she did not care enough to ask. The expensive food sat on the glass desk and slowly grew cold. Hours passed and the sun went down over the city. Jamari did not sleep. He stayed in the exact same position on the edge of the bed, rocking very slightly back and forth. His silence was not just a symptom of his autism. It was a calculated act of absolute defiance. By the morning of the second day, the fake smiles had completely vanished. The tension in the penthouse became thick and highly toxic. Trent was a powerful attorney who was used to bullying people into submission. He could intimidate witnesses and he could manipulate judges, but he could not negotiate with a brick wall. He paced back and forth in the living room, checking his expensive watch every 5 minutes. The money was so close he could practically smell it, but it was locked away behind the mind of a 17-year-old boy who absolutely refused to acknowledge his existence. Trent walked back into the bedroom and slammed his fist hard on the glass table, making Jamari flinch. "Type the code in," Trent yelled, his face turning a dark, angry red. "Do you understand what is at stake here? I am your legal guardian now. You have to do exactly what I say." Jamari just kept staring at the wall. The boy who had been terrified by the police lights on my front lawn was now displaying a level of endurance that absolutely terrified Trent. You cannot break someone who is already disconnected from your reality. Nia tried to intervene to calm her husband down, but Trent snapped at her. He blamed her for not knowing how to handle her own biological son. He told her she was useless. The perfect wealthy marriage was already cracking under the massive pressure of their own greed. They had stolen the boy from my home, but they were completely powerless to make him work for them. They were holding a machine they did not have the keys to operate. And then, the final devastating blow landed. It was late afternoon on the second day. Trent was pouring himself a glass of expensive scotch in the custom kitchen when his cell phone rang loudly. It was not a local Detroit number. It was a direct call from the corporate headquarters of Apex Dynamics out in Silicon Valley. Trent cleared his throat, smoothed his silk tie even though he was alone in his kitchen, and answered the phone with his most professional lawyer voice. He expected them to ask for a brief update on the integration process. He expected a polite corporate check-in from a junior executive, but the voice on the other end of the line did not belong to a polite secretary. It belonged to the chief technology officer of the entire corporation. And he was absolutely furious. The chief technology officer did not offer any pleasantries. He did not ask how Trent was doing. He told Trent that they had a massive crisis on their hands. Just an hour ago, the Apex engineering team had attempted to run a routine diagnostic test on the preliminary files Jamari had sent them before the custody battle began. They were simply trying to access the core framework of the noise filtering algorithm to prepare their servers. But the moment their corporate computers pinged the code, something catastrophic happened. The algorithm did not just reject their access. It completely locked itself down. The chief technology officer explained rapidly that the code was embedded with a highly complex self-encrypting protocol. It was a digital dead man switch. Because the original creator Jamari had not logged in from his recognized home internet address within a specific 48-hour window, the program assumed it was under a hostile security attack. It scrambled its own source code instantly. The file they had agreed to purchase for $5.6 million was now a completely dead piece of digital garbage. Trent felt the blood drain entirely from his face. His knees went weak. He gripped the edge of the marble kitchen counter so hard his knuckles turned white just to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. He stammered into the phone, telling the executive that there must be some kind of misunderstanding. He insisted that the brilliant boy was sitting right there in his spare bedroom and that they just needed a little more time to get him comfortable with the new laptop. The chief technology officer did not care about the excuses Trent was making. He operates in a ruthless tech world where time is worth millions of dollars per minute. He told Trent in a cold, unforgiving tone that corporate acquisitions do not wait for messy family drama. The board of directors was already losing patience and threatening to pull the funding for the entire project. The executive delivered a final, absolute ultimatum. "You have exactly 24 hours, the executive told Trent, his voice echoing through the phone speaker. "If the boy does not log into our servers and unlock that encryption protocol by tomorrow evening, we are terminating the acquisition contract permanently. We will walk away and you will not see a single dime of that $5.6 million. We will find another algorithm and you will be left with nothing." And then the line went completely dead. Trent slowly lowered the cell phone from his ear. The silence in his expensive penthouse was suddenly deafening. The massive fortune he had lied for, cheated for, and destroyed my family for was slipping right through his greedy fingers. He had 24 hours to force a severely autistic boy to do something he absolutely refused to do. He looked down the hallway toward the closed door of the spare bedroom where Jamari was still sitting in total silence. Trent realized in that exact moment what I had known all along. He did not hold the power. The corporate lawyer in the bespoke suit was entirely helpless. The quiet boy sitting on the edge of the bed held all the power in the world. And the clock was ticking down to 0. I did not sit in my empty house and cry. Tears are a luxury for people who have time to grieve, and I had no time at all. I had exactly 24 hours to dismantle a corporate lawyer, and I was going to do it with $42 and a transit pass. I walked out of my quiet neighborhood and walked 6 blocks to the main avenue. The cold Detroit wind whipped against my old leather jacket, but I did not feel the chill. My mind was entirely consumed by the logistics of war. I stood at the concrete bus shelter and waited for the number 4 bus. For 40 years, I controlled the routes of these massive machines. I knew every driver, every pothole, and every dangerous intersection in this city. Managing a city bus grid teaches you how to anticipate human behavior. It teaches you that every system has a vulnerability. Trent thought his power came from his money and his tailored suits. He thought the law was an impenetrable shield. He did not understand that real power comes from the shadows. He did not know that the people who clean the floors and drive the buses see absolutely everything. The bus pulled up to the curb and the pneumatic doors hissed open. The driver gave me a silent nod of recognition. I paid my fare and walked all the way to the very back seat. I sat down and watched the city transition through the scratched window. We moved away from the struggling working-class neighborhoods with their tiny lawns and faded siding. We pushed deeper into the forgotten corners of Detroit. The retail stores turned into pawn shops. The grocery stores turned into liquor stores with thick bulletproof glass. The people on the sidewalks walked with their heads down against the wind. Trent would never step foot in a neighborhood like this. If his luxury car broke down here, he would lock the doors and call the police in an absolute panic. But this was the real world. This was where the polite rules of corporate law did not apply. This was where you went when you needed to completely destroy a man without leaving any fingerprints. I got off the bus on a corner where the streetlights had been broken for years. The sidewalk was cracked and littered with broken glass. I walked past boarded-up storefronts and rusted chain-link fences. I was looking for a specific door. Halfway down the block, I found it. It was a faded neon sign that flickered weakly in the gray afternoon light. The sign simply read, 24-hour bail bonds and private investigations. The windows were covered by heavy metal security bars. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The bell attached to the top of the door chimed a dull, flat note. The office smelled like stale cigarette smoke, spilled coffee, and pure desperation. There were no leather chairs or mahogany tables here. There were just metal filing cabinets stacked dangerously high against the peeling wallpaper. Sitting behind a heavily scratched metal desk was DeAndre. DeAndre was a massive, broad-shouldered black man with a thick graying beard and cold, assessing eyes. He was wearing a faded gray sweatshirt and looking intently at 3 different computer monitors glowing in the dim room. 10 years ago, DeAndre had been one of the most ruthless and brilliant defense attorneys in the state of Michigan. He wore expensive suits and commanded the courtroom. But DeAndre had a conscience. He got disbarred by the state for bribing a corrupt police witness to save a battered domestic violence victim from going to a women's prison. The Bar Association took his law license and stripped him of his title, but they could not take his brilliant mind. He operated in the gray areas now. He dug up the toxic trash that rich and powerful people tried desperately to bury. And more importantly, DeAndre owed me a massive life debt. 20 years ago, DeAndre had a younger brother named Marcus, who got mixed up with a violent street gang on the east side. One rainy night, that 16-year-old boy ran onto my bus bleeding heavily from a deep stab wound in his chest. 3 armed men were chasing him down the street. The boy collapsed on the rubber floor of my bus right next to the fare box. The passengers screamed in terror. The armed men reached the doors and started bashing the reinforced glass with steel pipes, demanding I open the doors and hand the boy over. I did not follow the transit protocol. I did not wait for the police dispatch. I locked the pneumatic doors shut, turned off all the interior lights, and floored the heavy accelerator. I drove that massive city bus straight through 3 red lights and parked it directly inside the ambulance bay of the nearest emergency trauma center. The doctors saved Marcus by a margin of 5 minutes. I saved his brother's life, and DeAndre was the kind of man who never forgot a blood debt. DeAndre looked up from his glowing computer monitors. He did not smile, but the deep respect in his dark eyes was immediate. He stood up and extended a massive, heavy hand. "Alonzo," he said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that filled the small room. "It has been a very long time, old man. What brings you to this side of hell?" I shook his hand and sat down in the cheap plastic chair across from his desk. I did not waste time with small talk or pleasantries. Time was the one thing I did not have. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out my worn leather wallet. I opened it and took out the single $20 bill, the 2 $10 bills, and the 2 crumpled singles. I placed the $42 flat on his scratched metal desk. Then I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a small piece of folded paper. I placed it right next to the money. DeAndre looked down at the crumpled bills. Then he picked up the paper and unfolded it. It was the license plate number of the black luxury SUV that Trent drove. DeAndre leaned back in his heavy office chair and crossed his massive arms over his chest. $42, he said slowly. "You want me to find a missing dog for this kind of money, Alonzo?" "No," I said, my voice completely flat and cold. "I want you to destroy a man." DeAndre looked at the license plate number again, his expression turning serious. "Who does this vehicle belong to?" he asked. "It belongs to a corporate lawyer named Trent," I told him, looking directly into his eyes. "He married my estranged daughter. Yesterday morning he used a family court judge to freeze my pension accounts and steal my autistic grandson right out of my house. He thinks he is completely untouchable because he wears a bespoke suit and works in a glass tower downtown. He thinks I am just a helpless old man who is going to roll over and die." DeAndre let out a low, sharp whistle. He rubbed his graying beard. "A corporate attorney," he said. "They usually have their tracks covered tight. You want me to find a legal loophole in his custody filing. You want me to find a dirty judge." I shook my head slowly. "I do not need a lawyer, DeAndre," I said. "I need an autopsy on a living man. I want you to dig up his trash." DeAndre narrowed his eyes, listening closely. I leaned forward, resting my arms on his metal desk. "I want to know where he hides his money," I told him. "I want to know who he owes. I want to know every single dirty secret he keeps behind closed doors. Men who wear suits like that and drive cars like that are always hiding something. They live beyond their means. They cut corners. You find the crack in his foundation, and I will bring his entire house down on top of him." DeAndre looked at me for a long, silent moment. He understood exactly what I was asking for. It was not a request for legal assistance. It was a declaration of total war. He reached out and swept the $42 and the piece of paper off the desk, stuffing them into his pocket. "Go home, Alonzo," he said, turning his chair back toward his 3 glowing computer monitors. "Lock your doors and keep your phone close." I walked back out into the freezing wind. I rode the number 4 bus back to my empty house. When I unlocked the front door, the silence inside was completely deafening. I walked down the narrow hallway and stood in the doorway of Jamaris' bedroom. It was dark. His computer server was quiet. The mattress on the floor was empty. I could still smell the faint scent of the cinnamon oatmeal he never got to finish eating. I did not turn on the lights. I walked back to the living room and sat down in my old armchair. I placed my cell phone on the wooden coffee table directly in front of me. The sun went down and the house grew freezing cold. I did not turn on the heat. I sat in the dark and waited. I knew DeAndre was working. When a man like DeAndre dives into the digital underworld, he does not leave any stone unturned. He bypasses firewalls. He tracks offshore bank routing numbers. He recovers encrypted text messages and deleted emails. He sees the toxic things that wealthy people believe they have successfully erased from the world. Midnight passed, then 1 in the morning, then 2 in the morning. I did not close my eyes for a single second. I sat perfectly still, breathing slowly, gathering my strength. I was visualizing the look on Trent's face when his perfect world finally shattered. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, my cell phone vibrated violently against the wood of the coffee table. The sudden harsh buzzing noise broke the heavy, suffocating silence of the dark room. I reached out and picked it up, pressing the cold plastic to my ear. "Alonzo," a voice said through the static of the line. It was DeAndre. He did not sound tired at all. He sounded entirely electrified. He sounded like a man who had just struck an absolute vein of pure gold. "I am here," I said quietly. DeAndre let out a dry, hollow laugh that sent a chill down my spine. "You told me to find a crack in his foundation, Alonzo," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious whisper. "There is no foundation. Your son-in-law is not a hotshot corporate lawyer. He is a dead man walking." I walked into the neon-lit diner at 6 in the morning. The sky outside was still pitch black, and the freezing rain was turning the Detroit streets into sheets of gray ice. The diner smelled like old grease and bleach. It was entirely empty except for one man sitting in the back booth. DeAndre was drinking black coffee out of a chipped white mug. He had a thick manila folder resting on the sticky laminate table right next to his plate of half-eaten eggs. I walked over and slid into the vinyl booth across from him. I did not take off my wet coat. I just looked at the folder. DeAndre did not say good morning. He opened the folder and pushed a stack of printed papers across the table. He looked at me with eyes that had seen the worst of human nature for 3 decades. "You asked me to find a crack in his foundation, Alonzo," DeAndre said, his voice a low rumble over the diner music. "I am telling you there is absolutely no foundation at all. Everything your son-in-law built is made of cheap paper and stolen air." I looked down at the documents. They were financial records, bank statements, and property deeds. "I am a retired bus dispatcher. I do not read corporate ledgers." "Explain it to me," I said quietly. DeAndre leaned forward, resting his massive forearms on the table. "Trent Sterling is not a wealthy man," DeAndre said. "He is a master illusionist playing a highly dangerous game of pretend. That luxury penthouse condo he brought your grandson to last night is fully mortgaged. He took out 3 different loans against it, and he is 3 months behind on the payments. The custom suits, the expensive watches, the black BMW SUV out in your driveway, they are all leased on credit. His credit cards are entirely maxed out, and his prestigious law firm is bleeding out. 2 of his major corporate clients dropped him last year after he botched a massive merger. He has been secretly laying off staff for 6 months just to keep the lights on in his downtown office." I stared at DeAndre, processing the information. A man who is 3 months behind on his mortgage does not casually hire private investigators to stalk my house. A man who is broke does not act with that level of extreme arrogance unless he is desperately trying to cover up something much worse. That is just the surface. "Alonzo," DeAndre continued, sliding another piece of paper toward me. "That is the legal debt." But Trent got desperate. When his firm started losing money, he decided to play the stock market. But he did not use his own money because he did not have any left. He started quietly siphoning funds from the escrow accounts of his remaining clients. He took millions of dollars that did not belong to him, and he dumped it into a highly volatile offshore cryptocurrency scheme, thinking he could double the money, replace the stolen funds, and keep the profit. DeAndre took a sip of his black coffee. His face was entirely grim. "The crypto scheme collapsed overnight," DeAndre said. "It was a complete scam. The money vanished into thin air. Trent lost every single dime of the client escrow money." My chest tightened. Stealing client funds is an automatic disbarment and a guaranteed federal prison sentence. But Trent was not acting like a man worried about federal prison. He was acting like a man worried about a bullet to the back of the head. "There is more," I said. It was not a question. It was a certainty. DeAndre nodded slowly. "There is always more when a man is drowning." When the crypto money vanished, Trent panicked. He knew the clients would eventually ask for their escrow funds back, so he went looking for a quick loan to cover his tracks. But no legitimate bank in America will lend $3 million to a lawyer with a failing practice and a heavily mortgaged condo. So Trent went to the east side. He went to the Russo brothers. The name hit the table like a heavy lead weight. Even I knew who the Russo brothers were. Anyone who has lived in Detroit long enough knows the name. They are a local organized crime syndicate. They run illegal sports betting, extortion, and loan sharking operations out of the back rooms of auto body shops. They are not corporate lawyers who file motions in court. They are men who use baseball bats and blowtorches to collect their debts. Trent borrowed $3 million in cold hard cash from the Russos. DeAndre said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He promised to pay them back with 50% interest in 6 months. That was 5.5 months ago. His deadline is the final day of this month. If he does not hand the Russo brothers $4.5 million by midnight on the 31st, they are not going to sue him. They are going to break both of his legs, put him in the trunk of a car, and drop him in the middle of the Detroit River. I sat back in the vinyl booth. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with violent clarity. The sudden visit after 11 years, the emergency custody filing, the desperate midnight phone call offering to give me back my house if I just handed over Jamari. Trent did not want my grandson. Trent wanted a human shield. Jamari had a piece of software worth $5.6 million. If Trent could secure legal guardianship, he could legally authorize the sale to Apex Dynamics. He could take the $5.6 million, pay off the $4.5 million he owed the mafia, put the remaining $1 million back into his client escrow accounts, and walk away completely clean. He was literally planning to use my autistic grandson to buy his own life back from the mob. And Nia, I asked, my voice dangerously low, does she know? DeAndre pulled a photograph out of the folder and slid it across the table. It was a grainy surveillance photo taken outside an underground casino. It showed Trent looking terrified while a heavy-set man shoved a finger hard into his chest. Standing right next to Trent looking equally terrified was Naya. She knows everything, Alonzo, DeAndre said. She co-signed the loan from the Russos. If Trent goes down, she goes down with him. They are in this together. She is not a mother trying to reconnect with her lost child. She is a desperate woman trying to save her own skin. They need that tech company to wire the money immediately. That is why they are pushing so hard. That is why they use the police to rip the boy out of your house. They are out of time. I looked at the grainy photograph of my daughter. 11 years ago, she abandoned a little boy because she said he was too much of a burden. Now she was offering that same boy up on a silver platter to save herself from the violent consequences of her own greed. Any lingering trace of fatherly love I had left for her evaporated into thin air in that exact moment. I looked up at DeAndre. I felt a cold, absolute calm wash over my entire body. I was not fighting a powerful corporate lawyer anymore. I was not fighting a wealthy suburban family with endless resources. I was fighting a cornered rat. A cornered rat is highly dangerous, but a cornered rat is also entirely predictable. When they are backed against a wall, they act on pure, blind panic. They stop thinking clearly. They make fatal mistakes. Trent was holding my grandson hostage in a glass tower, thinking he was safe behind his legal documents. He thought he was playing a game of family court chess. He had no idea I was about to flip the entire board. DeAndre, I said, keeping my eyes locked on his, do you still have contacts in the underground? People who talk to the Russo brothers? DeAndre slowly nodded. I know a few guys who run numbers for them. Why? I leaned forward over the table. I want you to make a phone call. I want you to reach out to your contacts. Tell them you heard a very interesting rumor about the lawyer who owes them $3 million. Tell them Trent is trying to close a massive tech deal in secret so he can take the money and flee the country before the deadline. DeAndre narrowed his eyes, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. You want me to leak his location to the mob, Alonzo? Not just his location, I said. I want you to leak his schedule. Trent has to bring Jamari to the Apex Dynamics corporate office tomorrow to finalize the software integration. Tell the Russos exactly where that meeting is taking place. But tell them to wait. Tell them not to hit his penthouse tonight. Tell them to show up at the Apex building tomorrow right in the middle of the daylight. DeAndre chuckled a deep, rough sound. If the Russos show up at a corporate tech office looking for blood, the police will get called. The deal will completely collapse. Trent will be exposed in front of everyone. That is exactly the point, I said, my voice hard as steel. Trent used the law to humiliate me and steal my family. I am going to use the streets to completely destroy his. I want him backed into a corner in front of the billionaires he is trying to impress. I want him to look out the glass windows of that boardroom and see the Reapers waiting for him in the lobby. DeAndre gathered the papers and put them back into the thick manila folder. He stood up from the booth, tossing a $5 bill onto the table to cover his coffee. "Consider it done, old man," he said. "The Russos will get the message by noon today. They will be waiting for him tomorrow. You better make sure you and the boy are completely out of the blast zone when the bomb goes off. I will be exactly where I need to be," I said. DeAndre walked out of the diner, pulling his collar up against the freezing rain. I sat in the booth for a few more minutes, staring out the window at the dark Detroit streets. Trent thought he had stolen my most valuable asset, but he did not realize he had just dragged a digital Trojan horse into his own house. Jamari was completely locking down the code, and I was locking down the exits. Trent and Naya had 24 hours left to pretend they were wealthy, powerful people. Tomorrow the illusion was going to shatter into a million pieces. I finished my glass of water, stood up, and walked out into the cold. I had a boardroom meeting to attend. The luxury penthouse overlooking the Detroit River had transformed from a symbol of absolute power into a suffocating glass prison. The sun had completely set, and the city lights reflected off the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a dizzying cage of neon and shadows. Trent Sterling was completely unraveling. The bespoke navy blue suit he wore was now a wrinkled mess. He had ripped off his expensive silk tie and thrown it onto the marble kitchen counter. His breathing was heavy and ragged. He paced back and forth across the white living room rug, checking his phone every 30 seconds. He was a man who had built his entire life on the illusion of control, and right now he had absolutely zero control over anything. He had less than 18 hours before the Apex Dynamics Corporation officially terminated the $5.6 million acquisition. And worse, he had less than 24 hours before the Russo brothers realized he did not have their money. In the center of this massive collapsing universe sat Jamari. The 17-year-old boy was sitting on the edge of the white leather sofa. He was completely, perfectly still. He was a master of retreating into the deep, quiet corners of his own mind when the outside world became too dangerous. The brand-new silver laptop was sitting on the glass coffee table right in front of him. The screen was glowing, waiting for a password that only Jamari knew. The cursor blinked rhythmically. It was a digital heartbeat mocking Trent with every single pulse. Trent stopped pacing. He looked at the boy, and a dark, violent desperation washed over his face. He could not sue the boy. He could not manipulate the boy with legal jargon. He walked over to the coffee table and slammed both of his hands down on the glass. The loud, sudden noise made Jamari flinch, but he kept his eyes locked firmly on the blank television screen across the room. "Look at me!" Trent yelled, his voice cracking with pure panic. "I am talking to you, you little freak. Look at me right now." Jamari did not blink. He did not turn his head. He was using every ounce of his mental energy to build an invisible wall between himself and the screaming man. Trent completely lost the last shred of his sanity. He lunged forward over the glass table. He reached out with both hands and grabbed the collar of Jamari's faded graphic t-shirt. He yanked the boy violently upward, pulling him off the white leather sofa. Jamari let out a sharp gasp of air. His entire body went completely rigid. Being grabbed aggressively is a profound sensory violation for an autistic child. It feels like thousands of needles piercing the skin at once. Jamari squeezed his eyes shut and began to make a low humming sound in the back of his throat, trying to drown out the chaos. "Type the password into the machine," Trent screamed, shaking the boy so hard Jamari's head snapped back and forth. "You are going to type the code right now, or I swear to God I will break this computer over your head. I need that money. Do you hear me? I need it right now." "Stop being so difficult," Jamari Nia said, her voice completely cold and distant. "Just do what Trent says. You are acting like a spoiled brat. We gave you a beautiful room and expensive food, and you are ruining everything. Just type the stupid password." Jamari did not respond to her either. He just kept humming, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. Trent shoved the boy backward. Jamari stumbled and fell hard onto the leather sofa. Trent backed away, running his hands through his slicked hair, destroying his perfect appearance. He was breathing like a wild animal trapped in a corner. Physical violence was not working. The boy was completely locked inside his own head. Trent looked at the laptop. He looked at his watch. He realized with absolute terrifying clarity that he could not force the code out of the boy. There was only one person in the world who knew how to make Jamari open the digital doors. Trent pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. He opened his contacts and scrolled down to my name. Calling me was a direct violation of the emergency restraining order he had filed himself. If the courts found out he was contacting the man he claimed was a dangerous abuser, his entire legal narrative would completely collapse. But Trent did not care about the law anymore. The law could not save him from the Russo brothers. He hit the call button and pressed the phone to his ear. I was sitting in my dark living room back in my neighborhood on the east side. I had not moved from my armchair since I got back from the diner. I was watching the clock on the wall. I knew the timeline perfectly. I knew the pressure inside that penthouse was building to an explosive level. When my cell phone vibrated on the wooden table, I did not jump. I reached out slowly and picked it up. I pressed it to my ear and listened to the heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "Alonzo," Trent said, his voice dripping with pure venom and desperation. "You are violating a court order, counselor," I said, my voice perfectly calm and flat. "Listen to me, you old fool," Trent hissed. "I do not care about the court order. I do not care about anything except getting this algorithm unlocked right now. You poisoned this boy. You brainwashed him. He is sitting here staring at the wall and he will not type the code. You are going to tell me the password right now." I smiled in the dark. It was a cold, humorless smile. "I do not know the password, Trent," I told him honestly. "The boy builds his own systems. I do not touch his machines." Trent let out a loud, desperate scream of frustration. He kicked something heavy in his penthouse and I heard it crash against the floor. "You are lying," he yelled into the phone. "You know exactly how to make him work. You are going to fix this right now or I am going to end him." I stopped smiling. The air in my living room suddenly felt freezing cold. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You heard me?" Trent threatened, entirely unhinged. "I have the legal paperwork, Alonzo. I have full medical custody. If you do not give me the password or tell me how to make him type it, I am going to make one phone call. I will tell the state that he is having a violent psychotic breakdown. I will have him committed to a state psychiatric ward tonight. Do you know what they do to kids like him in the state ward, Alonzo? They strap them to a bed. They drug them until they cannot even blink. They will lock him in a padded room and you will never see him again." He was using my absolute worst nightmare as a weapon. He was threatening to destroy Jamaris' mind just to force my hand. A normal man would have panicked. A normal grandfather would have broken down and begged for mercy. But I am not a normal man, and I had already seen the bottom of Trent's soul. I knew he was bluffing. You do not lock up your only ticket to a multi-million-dollar payday. But I also knew I had to give him exactly what he wanted to spring the final trap. I let a long, heavy silence hang on the line. I let Trent sweat. I let him feel the crushing weight of the ticking clock. "Trent," I finally said, my voice remarkably soft and steady. "You cannot force a boy like Jamari to do anything with violence. You cannot scream at him. He does not respond to yelling or threats. He responds to logic. He responds to his routine. You have completely terrified him and his brain has shut down to protect himself. Then how do I turn him back on?" Trent demanded, breathing heavily. "You bring him to a professional environment," I said slowly, feeding him the bait inch by inch. "The corporate buyer, Apex Dynamics, needs the code integrated directly into their servers, right?" "Yes," Trent snapped. "They gave me until tomorrow evening." "Then set up a final integration meeting," I told him. "Tell Apex Dynamics to have their entire board of directors ready at their downtown headquarters tomorrow at noon. Bring the laptop, bring Jamari, and you clear my name with the security desk at the front lobby. Let me walk into that boardroom." "Absolutely not," Trent yelled. "I have a restraining order against you. You are not getting anywhere near this deal." I leaned forward in the dark. "Then you lose the $5.6 million, Trent," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You lose the money, and whoever you owe that money to is going to come looking for you. You have absolutely no other choice. If I am in the room, Jamari will feel safe. If he feels safe, I can use the logic patterns we practice to guide him through the unlock sequence. I will get him to type the password in front of the executives. You get your money, the company gets their code." Trent was silent. I could hear the gears grinding in his desperate mind. He was weighing the risk of letting me into the room against the absolute certainty of his own death if he failed to pay the mob. He thought he was still the smartest person in the room. He thought that once I got the boy to unlock the computer, he could just call the police and have me arrested for violating the restraining order. He thought he could use me and throw me away. "Fine," Trent finally whispered, his voice trembling with exhausted rage. "Tomorrow at noon, the Apex Dynamics Tower downtown, floor 42. I will leave your name at the desk. But listen to me very carefully, Alonzo. If you try anything smart, if you try to take the boy or mess with the transfer, I will ruin you. I will see you at noon, Trent, I said. I hung up the phone. I sat in the dark living room, feeling the absolute stillness of the house. Trent had taken the bait completely. He had swallowed the hook all the way down to his stomach. He was going to walk into the brightest room in the city thinking he was about to become a millionaire. He had absolutely no idea that he was walking straight into an execution. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It was time to finish this. I walked into the massive glass-walled boardroom of Apex Dynamics and immediately felt the temperature drop. The room was a fortress of extreme wealth and absolute corporate power. It offered a panoramic view of the downtown Detroit skyline, but inside the air was completely stagnant and heavy with unspoken tension. I stood just inside the heavy oak doors, feeling the thick plush carpet under my worn work boots. The room was filled with men and women in dark, expensive suits, sitting around a massive, polished mahogany table. At the head of the table sat the chief executive officer of the corporation, a man with silver hair and cold, calculating eyes. And standing right next to Jamari at the far end of the table was Trent. When I walked through those heavy doors, Trent had initially frozen like an animal caught in the headlights of a speeding truck. He had shouted for security, his face pale with sudden absolute terror. But the chief executive officer had raised his hand and silenced the room, telling Trent that I was listed in their security system as the lead independent consultant on this specific project. Now, the initial shock was wearing off. Trent was a survivor in the corporate jungle. When a predator realizes it is bleeding, it does not swim away, it attacks blindly. I watched Trent force his racing heart rate down. I watched him straighten his wrinkled suit jacket and frantically adjust his silk tie. He was pulling the armor of his profession back over his panicked soul. He was trying to remember that he was a lawyer and I was just an old man. He turned away from me and looked directly at the chief executive officer. Trent placed both of his hands flat on the polished mahogany table, leaning forward to project absolute authority. It was a classic courtroom intimidation tactic designed to control the narrative. "It does not matter what you call him," Trent said, his voice echoing loudly in the massive, quiet room. "You can call him a consultant, you can call him a grandfather, you can call him the King of England, for all I care. The facts of this case remain exactly the same. Jamari is a 17-year-old boy. He is legally a minor child with a documented severe cognitive disability. And as of yesterday morning, I hold the emergency physical and legal guardianship over him, signed by a county family court judge." Trent reached into his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out the thick stack of court documents. He threw them onto the center of the table. The heavy paper slapped against the wood, making a sharp cracking sound. "I am his legal parent." Trent continued, his confidence rising with every single word he spoke. "And according to the intellectual property laws of this state, any asset algorithm or financial windfall created by a minor child while living under the roof of their legal guardians belongs entirely to the estate of those guardians. He does not have the legal capacity to sign a contract. Alonzo certainly does not have the legal capacity to authorize a corporate sale. I am the only person in this entire room with the authority to execute this transfer." Nia was sitting in a plush leather chair next to the window. She crossed her legs and nodded in agreement, playing her role flawlessly. She looked at the corporate lawyers sitting around the table with a soft, pleading expression. "We just want to protect our son's future," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "We want to make sure this money is managed by legal professionals, not squandered by an old man who does not understand the modern financial world." I did not interrupt them. I let them speak. I let them dig their own graves with their own arrogant words. I looked at Jamari. The boy was sitting in a massive leather executive chair that was far too big for him. The brand new silver laptop was open on the table in front of him. The screen was still displaying the encrypted lock sequence. Jamari was completely ignoring Trent and Nia. He was looking directly at me. His dark eyes were calm now. The terrible panic from the night before was entirely gone. He was back in his element, surrounded by machines and logic, and he knew I was there to protect him. I gave him a very small, almost imperceptible nod. He blinked twice. We were completely synchronized. Trent turned back to the chief executive officer. His face was flushed with the thrill of his own legal argument. He thought he had just won the entire war. "So, here is how this is going to work," Trent said, pointing a finger at the laptop screen. "Jamari is going to type his little password into that machine and unlock your algorithm. You are going to verify that the source code is completely intact. And the absolute second your engineers confirm the code is viable, you are going to authorize the wire transfer of $5.6 million directly into my firm escrow account, as outlined in the revised contract I sent your legal team this morning. If you do not agree to these terms right now, I will take my son, and we will walk out of this building, and you will never see this software again. The boardroom went completely silent. The heavy stakes of the deal hung in the air, pressing down on everyone's shoulders. The chief executive officer leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers together. He looked at the four corporate lawyers sitting to his left. The lead corporate counsel, a sharp-looking woman with severe glasses, leaned in and whispered something into the executive's ear. She nodded slowly, looking down at Trent's scattered court documents. The chief executive officer sighed and sat forward. He looked at me with an expression of cold business pragmatism. He did not care about the mafia waiting outside. He did not care about family loyalty or broken hearts. He only cared about the mathematics of the deal and protecting his company from future lawsuits. Alonzo, the executive, said, his voice smooth and entirely detached. We respect the consulting work you have done with the boy, but Mr. Sterling is technically correct. Our legal team has reviewed the emergency custody order. It is a valid state document. As long as that court order is in place, Trent Sterling has the absolute fiduciary right to control the intellectual property of the minor. We cannot legally bypass the guardian to make a payout. Trent let out a loud, arrogant laugh. He looked at me with a smirk so toxic it could have killed a lesser man. You hear that, old man? Trent sneered. The adults are talking now. You tried to play a smart game, but you do not know the rules. You are completely out of your league. Now stand there quietly and watch me close my deal. Trent turned to Jamari and tapped the glass screen of the laptop aggressively. Go ahead, buddy, Trent said, his voice dripping with fake patience. Your grandfather is right here watching you. Nobody is going to hurt you. Just type the password and let us all go home. Every single person in that massive glass room turned their eyes to Jamari. The wealthy executives, the sharp lawyers, Naya and Trent. They were all holding their breath, waiting for a 17-year-old autistic boy to hand over a massive fortune. They were waiting for me to give him the verbal command to surrender. They thought I was completely beaten. They thought the heavy weight of corporate law had finally crushed my spirit. I looked at Trent. I looked at the dark sweat stains bleeding through the underarms of his expensive blue suit. I knew about the $3 million. I knew about the Russo brothers waiting for him. I knew that his entire aggressive performance was nothing but the desperate thrashing of a man who was fully aware he was about to die. He was holding on to that custody paper like it was a life preserver in a violent hurricane. I took a slow, deep breath. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly electric. I did not look at Jamari. I did not tell the boy to touch the keyboard. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of anger. I just shook my head slowly, acting like a man who had finally seen the absolute truth of the universe. You know what, Trent? I said, my voice low, but echoing clearly across the long mahogany table. You make a very compelling argument. Trent's smirk faltered for a second, confused by my sudden peaceful agreement. I took a few slow steps forward until I was standing right next to the massive table. You are absolutely right, I continued, keeping my eyes locked firmly on his. The law is the law. Intellectual property rights are incredibly strict in this country. A person cannot just steal something that belongs to someone else and sell it for millions of dollars. Ownership is everything. The creator holds all the power. And if the creator is a minor, then the legal guardian holds the keys to the kingdom. That is the exact letter of the law. Trent puffed out his chest, looking extremely proud of himself. Exactly, he said. I am glad you finally understand reality, Alonzo. I reached my right hand inside the breast pocket of my worn leather jacket. The movement was slow and entirely deliberate. The corporate lawyers watched my hand closely, but they did not call security. They thought I was reaching for a handkerchief or a pair of reading glasses. But I am not a lawyer, Trent, I said, pulling my hand out of the pocket. I am just a retired bus dispatcher. I spent 40 years fixing broken systems and making sure things ran exactly the way they were supposed to run. And when you work with complex machines for that long, you learn to keep all your receipts. I pulled out a heavily creased yellowing manila envelope. It was old, the edges were frayed, and it looked completely out of place in that pristine billion-dollar boardroom. I held it in my rough, calloused hands, holding it up for everyone to see. You are right about the intellectual property laws, Trent, I said, my voice dropping to a dead silent whisper that froze the entire room. They are very strict indeed. I placed the yellowing envelope flat on the polished mahogany table and slid it slowly across the wood directly toward the chief executive officer. Let us talk about exactly who owns this code. I placed the yellowing envelope flat on the polished mahogany table and slid it slowly across the wood directly toward the chief executive officer. The heavy silence in the boardroom was absolute. Trent let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. He crossed his arms over his chest and looked at the old envelope like it was a piece of garbage I had just picked up off the street. "What is that?" Alonzo Trent asked, his voice dripping with condescending poison. "Did you bring us your old electric bills? Did you bring a handwritten letter asking for a handout? We are conducting a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition here. We do not have time for your pathetic attempts to delay the inevitable." I did not look at Trent. I kept my eyes locked on the chief executive officer. I nodded toward the envelope. "Open it," I said quietly. The chief executive officer did not touch it. He looked at his lead corporate counsel. The sharp-looking woman with the severe glasses leaned forward. She picked up the envelope. It was sealed with old, dry glue that cracked loudly as she opened the flap. She reached inside and pulled out a stack of documents. The paper was thick and slightly yellowed around the edges, indicating its age. There was a large official seal stamped on the very first page. The room remained completely silent as she read the first few lines. I watched her eyes move across the page. I watched the bored corporate indifference fade from her face. I watched it get replaced by genuine professional shock. She pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose and read the second page. Then she looked up at me. She looked at Jamari. Then she looked directly at the chief executive officer. "Sir," she said, her voice completely devoid of the confidence she had displayed just 5 minutes ago. "This is a United States patent registration. It was filed and officially granted in 1998. Trent frowned. The arrogant smirk on his face twitched. "A patent," he said, stepping closer to the table. "What does an old patent have to do with this transaction?" The lead counsel did not answer Trent. She turned the document around and slid it in front of the chief executive officer. "Let me tell you a story about 1998. I said, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the massive glass room. Back then, the Detroit City bus dispatch system was a complete nightmare. We were running hundreds of heavy buses across the city using analog radio frequencies. But the radio interference in the downtown grid was massive. The drivers could not hear the dispatchers. The dispatchers could not hear the drivers. The static was incredibly loud. It was a dangerous mess of overlapping signals and white noise. The city refused to buy a new radio system because it cost too much money, so I fixed it myself. The chief executive officer was staring at the patent document, tracing the diagrams with his index finger. I was not a computer programmer, I continued. I was a mechanic and a dispatcher. I built a physical hardware matrix. I built a frequency filter using analog sound wave cancellation logic. It identified the core frequency of the human voice and actively suppressed all the ambient static noise surrounding it. I installed the prototype in my own dispatch tower. It worked perfectly. The city ended up using it for 10 years. But before I gave it to them, I spent $2,000 of my own savings to hire a patent attorney. I patented the core mathematical matrix of that noise filtering system under my own name. Trent was staring at me. His face was starting to lose its color. "That is a nice historical anecdote," Alonzo Trent said, his voice sounding slightly thinner than before. "But it has absolutely nothing to do with the digital algorithm my stepson wrote last year." I turned my head and finally looked directly at Trent. "It has absolutely everything to do with it," I told him. "Jamari is a brilliant boy. He is a genius. But he did not invent the core architecture of his algorithm out of thin air. 3 years ago, he was digging through the old boxes in my garage. He found the original blueprints and the mathematical formulas for my 1998 radio filter." I looked over at Jamari. The boy was sitting perfectly still, watching the executives. "Jamari hated the noise of the world," I said softly. He hated the sirens, the crowded rooms, the overlapping voices. It caused him severe physical pain. When he saw my old analog frequency filter, he understood exactly what it was. He realized that the mathematical logic I used to clean up the bus radios could be translated into modern computer code. He took my physical matrix and he reverse engineered it. He spent 2 years turning my analog hardware into digital software. That is what the EchoLink app actually is. It is a digital translation of my exact physical invention. The lead corporate counsel cleared her throat. The sound was incredibly loud in the quiet room. She looked at Trent with an expression of deep legal concern. She tapped the official seal on the patent document. "Mr. Sterling," she said, addressing Trent directly, "I am looking at the foundational logic schematics attached to this patent. I have spent the last month reviewing the source code of the algorithm your stepson provided to our engineering team. The base architecture is identical. The boy did not create a new method of sound filtration. He digitized an existing patented method." Trent gripped the edge of the mahogany table. His knuckles turned completely white. He was trying to process the absolute catastrophe unfolding in front of his eyes. "No," he stammered. "No, that is impossible. It is a computer application. It is a completely different medium." He wrote the code himself. "The medium does not matter, Trent," I said, stepping right up to the edge of the table. "You are a senior partner at a law firm. You should know exactly how intellectual property derivatives work. If I write a book and you translate that book into French, you do not own the story. You just own the translation. Jamari wrote the digital translation. But the core algorithm, the very foundation that makes the software valuable, belongs entirely to the original patent holder." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the polished wood. I looked at the chief executive officer. "Jamaris app is a digital derivative of my legally owned patent," I stated firmly. "And according to federal intellectual property law, that means legally I own 90% of this algorithm. Jamari owns the remaining 10% for his digital implementation." The color drained completely from Trent's face. He looked like a man who had just been thrown out of an airplane without a parachute. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Nia, who was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. She had thought she was walking into a room to collect millions of dollars. She was slowly realizing she had walked into an absolute trap. The chief executive officer looked at Trent. "Mr. Sterling," the executive said, his voice cold and unforgiving. "Is this true? Were you aware that the intellectual property you are attempting to sell us today is encumbered by a pre-existing federal patent?" "I did not know." Trent gasped, struggling to breathe. "He never told me. The boy never said anything about an old patent." "Because you never asked him," I said, my voice slicing through the room like a razor blade. "You never asked the boy how he built it. You never sat down with him and talked about his process. You just saw the dollar signs and you ran to a judge to steal him. You thought you were stealing a $5.6 million asset from a helpless minor. But you did not steal an asset, Trent. You stole a minor who holds a 10% minority stake in an asset that belongs entirely to me." The corporate lawyers began whispering rapidly among themselves. The entire legal foundation of Trent's aggressive strategy had just evaporated into thin air. He had spent 3 days torturing a disabled boy. He had broken into my home with the police. He had frozen my retirement accounts and threatened to put my grandson in a psychiatric ward. He had done all of that under the arrogant assumption that the money belonged to Jamari and therefore belonged to the legal guardian. But the $5.6 million did not belong to Jamari. It belonged to Alonzo. And Alonzo was standing right in front of them, holding the only key that mattered. Trent took a step backward away from the table. He looked frantically at the windows. He looked at his cell phone resting on the wood. He knew exactly what this meant. If he did not control the asset, he did not control the money. If he did not control the money, he could not pay the Russo brothers. And the Russo brothers were going to be looking for him before the sun went down. "This is a trick," Trent yelled, his voice echoing with absolute raw panic. "This is a scam. He is lying. The boy owns the code." The lead corporate counsel shook her head. "We cannot proceed with this transaction," she told the chief executive officer. "If we wire the funds to Mr. Sterling's escrow account knowing there is a dominant patent claim, we will be liable for massive federal copyright infringement. The purchase agreement as drafted by Mr. Sterling is completely legally void." The words hung in the air. Completely legally void. The deal was dead. Trent's salvation was dead. The massive payday he had sold his soul to capture was sitting right in front of him, and he could not touch a single penny of it. Trent looked at me. His eyes were wide and wild. The bespoke suit could not hide the terrified animal underneath. He realized that I had orchestrated this entire moment. I had let him take the boy. I had let him bring us to this massive corporate tower. I had let him build his entire arrogant argument just so I could destroy him at the exact moment he thought he had won. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just looked at him with the cold, dead eyes of a man who had spent 40 years surviving on the streets of Detroit. "You thought I was just an old mechanic, Trent," I whispered. "But you forgot that mechanics know exactly how to take things apart. And I just took your entire life apart." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Trent was breathing heavily, swaying slightly on his expensive Italian shoes. The trap had snapped shut, and there was absolutely no way out. The boardroom was so quiet you could hear the soft humming of the air conditioning vents in the ceiling. The chief executive officer was staring at the yellowing patent document. The lead corporate counsel was adjusting her severe glasses, and Trent Sterling was completely falling apart. I stood at the edge of the mahogany table and watched the illusion of his perfect wealthy life crumble into fine dust. Trent began to sweat profusely. It was not a subtle nervous sweat. It was the heavy cold perspiration of a man who suddenly realizes his heart is about to stop beating. Dark patches spread rapidly across the underarms of his expensive custom suit. His perfectly slicked hair fell out of place, hanging limply over his damp forehead. "He is lying," Trent yelled, his voice cracking horribly. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "Look at him. Just look at him. He is an old mechanic. He spent his entire pathetic life changing oil filters and sweeping the floors of a city bus depot. He does not know the first thing about digital algorithms. He cannot code. He probably cannot even operate a smartphone without asking for help. This is a complete fabrication. It is a desperate, pathetic lie designed to extort me and sabotage this corporate transaction." The lead corporate counsel did not even look up at Trent. She kept her sharp eyes locked entirely on the official seal of the document. She traced the federal registration number with the tip of her expensive pen. "It is a certified United States patent, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice completely devoid of any emotion or sympathy. "The registration number is entirely valid. The dates have been legally verified. This document predates your stepson's software application by more than 2 decades. The mathematical logic outlined in these schematics is identical to the core architecture of the program we are attempting to purchase today." Trent slammed both of his hands down flat on the polished wood. "It is a coincidence," he screamed, spitting slightly as the words ripped from his throat. "It is just a vaguely similar concept. Jamari wrote every single line of that code by himself sitting in his bedroom. He told me so. He built it from absolute scratch without any help from anyone." Trent was drowning, and he was desperately grasping at water. He realized the corporate lawyers were completely ignoring his frantic arguments. They do not care about family drama or his financial desperation. They only care about legal liability and patent infringement. Trent turned his wild, panicked eyes toward the only person in the room who he thought he could still control. He turned toward Jamari. Trent walked quickly around the edge of the massive table until he was standing right next to the oversized leather executive chair where Jamari was sitting. Naya sat frozen in her seat by the window, her face pale, her hands shaking around her glass of water. She realized they were losing the money, but she was too terrified of her husband to intervene. Trent leaned over the boy, invading his physical space, casting a dark, heavy shadow over the laptop screen. "Jamari, tell them," Trent demanded, his voice tight with a rising hysterical panic. "Tell these corporate executives that your grandfather had absolutely nothing to do with your application. Tell them you built it entirely on your own without any help from his old garbage blueprints. Tell them he is just a crazy old man trying to steal your future." Jamari did not look at Trent. The boy was staring straight ahead at the blinking cursor on the silver laptop. He was rocking his body very slightly back and forth. It was a self-soothing motion. He was trying to regulate his internal nervous system while the chaotic energy of the screaming lawyer surrounded him. I did not say a single word. I did not rush forward to protect the boy. I knew that Jamari was not broken. I knew the absolute strength that lived inside his brilliant mind. He did not need me to speak for him in this specific moment. He needed to process the environment and finish the equation on his own terms. Trent completely lost his fragile grip on reality. He reached out and grabbed Jamari's shoulder, violently shaking the boy. I said, "Tell them," Trent screamed, his face turning a dark, unnatural red. "Tell them right now, or I swear I will lock you away forever." The exact moment Trent's hand clamped down on his shoulder, Jamari stopped rocking. His entire body went completely, perfectly still. It was the absolute stillness of a machine preparing to execute a final command. Jamari slowly raised his head. He did not look at his mother. He did not look at the sweating, screaming man standing over him. He looked directly across the long mahogany table, meeting the cold, calculating eyes of the chief executive officer. And then, for the very first time since this entire terrible nightmare began, Jamari opened his mouth and spoke aloud. His voice was completely flat. It was entirely devoid of any fear, any anger, or any human emotion. It sounded like a highly advanced computer reading raw data from a secured hard drive. The words were perfectly articulated, slicing through the heavy tension of the boardroom with absolute surgical precision. "Grandpa Alonzo, patent number 449882B, Jamari said, his clear voice echoing loudly off the thick glass walls. I utilized his base analog matrix to clean the corrupted audio files. The entire room completely stopped breathing. The corporate lawyers froze in their seats. The chief executive officer sat forward, gripping the leather arms of his chair. Nia dropped her glass of water onto the plush carpet, but no one even looked in her direction. Trent removed his hand from the boy's shoulder as if he had just been severely burned by a live electrical wire. Jamari blinked slowly, keeping his dark eyes locked on the executive. The environmental noise-filtering architecture is not my original creation. Jamari continued, delivering the final devastating blow with flawless logic. I digitized his exact physical schematics. The structural code belongs entirely to him. I simply wrote the translation. It was the absolute, undeniable truth delivered straight from the mouth of the asset himself. Trent could not argue with it. He could not manipulate it. He could not file an emergency injunction to hide it from a judge. The Golden Goose had just looked directly at the billionaire buyers and told them exactly who owned the golden eggs. Trent stumbled backward away from the boy. His expensive Italian shoes dragged heavily across the carpet. He looked like a dead man whose ghost had not yet realized it was time to leave the empty body. The $5.6 million was completely gone. The money he needed to replace the stolen client escrow funds was gone. The money he desperately needed to pay the Russo brothers was gone. His massive luxury penthouse was inevitably going into foreclosure. His prestigious downtown law firm was completely bankrupt. He had traded his entire existence for a lottery ticket that belonged to someone else. And the deadline for his life was today. He looked around the massive glass room. The executives were staring at him with pure disgust. His wife was staring at him with absolute terror. He was entirely, completely alone. I watched the exact moment Trent Sterling's mind completely shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The arrogant corporate lawyer died, and a cornered, terrified animal took his place. He realized that the mafia was already looking for him. He realized that DeAndre had leaked his schedule. He had absolutely nothing left to lose and nothing left to sell. Trent let out a feral, guttural scream. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated madness. He lunged across the open space of the boardroom. He did not go for the laptop. He did not go for the corporate executives. He came straight for me. He closed the distance in a split second, his face twisted in absolute violent rage. He crashed into my chest, grabbing the front of my worn leather jacket with both of his shaking hands. He tried to slam me back against the heavy oak doors. "Give me the money," he screamed, his spit flying into my face. "I need that money, Alonzo. You have to give it to me. They are going to kill me. You are a dead man. I will kill you myself." I did not even raise my hands to fight him off. I did not flinch. I just looked directly into his wild, panicked eyes with absolute cold indifference. Before Trent could even attempt to throw a single punch, the heavy boardroom doors behind me flew open. Two massive Apex corporate security guards wearing dark tactical suits crashed into the room. They had been standing right outside listening to the screaming. They hit Trent from the blind side with the devastating physical force of a moving freight train. Trent's hands were violently ripped away from my jacket. The guards tackled him hard, driving him straight down into the plush carpet. The impact knocked the breath completely out of his lungs. One guard planted a heavy knee squarely in the center of Trent's spine, while the other aggressively twisted his arms behind his back, pulling out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Trent writhed on the floor, kicking his legs and sobbing hysterically. His bespoke suit was torn. His dignity was completely erased. He was a broken, pathetic creature screaming for a mercy he had never once shown to anyone else. I stood over him, straightening the lapels of my old leather jacket. The physical takedown was just the beginning. The real punishment was waiting for him down in the lobby. The heavy thud of Trent hitting the floor echoed through the massive boardroom. The two corporate security guards held him down with practiced, brutal efficiency. One guard kept his knee firmly pressed between Trent's shoulder blades, while the other secured the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Trent's cheek was smashed against the thick plush carpet. His expensive, custom-tailored suit was torn at the shoulder. He was gasping for air, struggling against the weight of the men holding him down. The polished mahogany table and the sweeping views of the Detroit skyline suddenly felt like a perfectly designed high-altitude prison. Trent turned his head as much as the guard would allow. His face was entirely red, his eyes wide with wild, desperate panic. He looked across the room toward the window where his wife was still sitting. "Nia, please," Trent begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "Nia, do something. Call the police. Tell them he assaulted me. Tell them he is trying to steal the money. We are going to lose everything, Nia. They are going to kill me." I watched my daughter very closely. I watched the exact moment her survival instinct kicked in. Nia was a woman who had spent her entire life attaching herself to whoever could offer her the most comfortable existence. 11 years ago, she thought Jamari was a burden, so she left him on my sofa and walked away. 3 years ago, she thought Trent was a golden ticket, so she married him and put on the designer clothes. But right now, Trent was not a golden ticket. Trent was an anchor tied to a sinking ship, and the water was rising fast. Nia did not stand up to help her husband. She did not yell at the security guards to let him go. She looked at Trent writhing on the floor with an expression of absolute profound disgust. She slowly stood up from the leather chair, smoothing out the wrinkles in her beige dress. She stepped completely away from him, leaving him to drown alone. Then she turned her eyes toward me. I saw the tears forming before she even opened her mouth. It was the same weapon she had tried to use in the family court the day before. She walked toward me, her hands clasped tightly together, her face trembling with manufactured sorrow. "Dad!" she cried, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. "Dad, you have to understand. I did not know about any of this. I did not know he was stealing from his clients. I did not know he borrowed money from the mob. He lied to me, Dad. He manipulated me. I am just a victim in all of this." She stopped a few feet away from me, looking up with wide, pleading eyes. "I am your daughter, Alonzo," she sobbed, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "We are flesh and blood. You cannot just leave me with nothing. I co-signed those loans. If he goes down, those terrible people are going to come after me too. You have to give me half of the money, Dad. Just half. It is the only way I can pay them off and disappear. You owe me that much. We are family." I looked at her tears. I felt absolutely nothing. 40 years of driving city buses teaches you how to spot a scam from a mile away. You stopped being my daughter the day you left a 6-year-old autistic boy in my living room and changed your phone number, I said, my voice completely steady and cold. You are not a victim, Nia. You are a willing participant who only regrets getting caught. You came into my house yesterday and tried to use the law to strip me of the only family I actually care about. You do not get a single dime. Nia gasped, taking a step back as if I had physically struck her. But before she could formulate another lie, the attention in the room violently shifted back to the center of the mahogany table. Jamari had not moved during the entire physical altercation. He had ignored Trent's screaming. He had ignored the heavy thud of the security guards. He had ignored his mother's desperate crying. He was sitting in the oversized leather executive chair, staring intently at the glowing screen of the silver laptop. He was completely in his own world. The chief executive officer and the lead corporate counsel were watching him closely. The silence in the room stretched out thick and heavy. Jamari slowly raised his hands and placed his long, thin fingers on the computer keyboard. He did not hesitate. He did not look at any notes. He typed a 10-digit alphanumeric code with lightning speed. The keys clicked softly in the quiet room. When he hit the enter key, the screen of the laptop flashed a bright, vibrant green. A complex series of loading bars filled the display, and then a small notification chimed. System unlocked. The lead corporate counsel immediately leaned forward, her eyes scanning the lines of code scrolling across the screen. She pulled a secondary tablet from her briefcase and quickly cross-referenced the data. The entire room waited in suspended animation. Even Trent stopped struggling on the floor, craning his neck to look at the lawyers. "The code is completely intact," the lead counsel said, her voice tight with professional relief. "The encryption has been successfully lifted. The base architecture matches the patent perfectly, and the digital translation is fully functional. We have what we need." The chief executive officer let out a long breath. He looked at me and gave a short, respectful nod. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a secure corporate authentication token. He plugged it into a port on the polished mahogany table and opened a secure financial application on his own terminal. The terms of the intellectual property transfer are now fully satisfied. The executive stated clearly for the record, the asset has been delivered and verified by our engineering protocols. Alonzo, as the primary patent holder and majority owner of the derivative application, I am executing the payment of $5.6 million right now. He typed his own authorization code into the terminal. He moved his mouse over a green button on the screen. He clicked it. Transfer complete, he announced. The money was gone from the corporate accounts. $5.6 million was flying through the digital ether, moving faster than the speed of light. On the floor, Trent suddenly started laughing. It was a wet, horrible sound. It was the laugh of a man whose mind was completely breaking under the pressure. He kicked his legs against the heavy boots of the security guards, lifting his head off the carpet. "You stupid old man," Trent screamed, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of arrogant triumph. "You just gave it all away." I looked down at him, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides. "You think you outsmarted me?" Trent yelled, struggling violently against the handcuffs. "You think you won because you proved you own the patent. But you forgot one tiny legal detail, Alonzo. The money has to be deposited into the verified destination account listed on the original software registry. The money is going directly into the kid's personal bank account, and I still hold the emergency legal guardianship over the kid." Trent laughed again, a desperate gasping sound. "As long as I am his legal guardian, I have total fiduciary control over his personal accounts. The absolute second that $5.6 million hits his bank, I am transferring every single penny of it out to pay my debts. You did all of this work, you humiliated me in front of these billionaires, but you still lose. The money is mine." Nia looked down at Trent, her eyes widening with a sudden flash of greedy hope. She thought the sinking ship had just found a magical leak patch. She thought they were going to be rich again. The corporate lawyers looked at me. They knew Trent was technically right. If the money landed in a standard personal account tied to Jamara's social security number, the legal guardian would have immediate, unhindered access to it. It was a massive fatal flaw in the plan. But I was not a man who left doors open. I slowly walked around the edge of the mahogany table until I was standing directly over Trent. I looked down at his ruined suit and his bleeding cheek. I lowered myself down, bending my knees until I was crouching right next to his ear. I rested my forearms on my thighs, getting close enough to smell the sour stench of his terrified sweat. "Trent," I whispered, my voice so soft it barely carried past the two security guards holding him down. "Do you really think I would walk into a room like this and leave a door completely wide open for a rat like you to crawl through?" Trent's laughter abruptly stopped. His eyes darted nervously, trying to read my face. "You spent 3 days trying to force my grandson to unlock a computer," I said, speaking slowly so he could understand every single word. "But you never bothered to ask what else he was doing on that computer before you stole him from my house." I pointed a finger toward Jamari, who was quietly closing the silver laptop on the table above us. 3 weeks ago, I told Trent Jamari went into the deep source code of his own algorithm. He hard-coded the final payout destination directly into the unalterable framework of the application. He bypassed all standard personal banking routing numbers. He bypassed his own social security number. He bypassed everything that a family court judge could ever possibly touch. Trent's eyes widened. The color that had rushed to his face suddenly drained completely away, leaving him looking like a pale ghost. "What did he do?" Trent gasped. "He routed the payment directly into a blind trust registered in the state of Delaware." I said, the cold reality of my words hammering the final nails into his coffin. "A blind trust that was established by an independent corporate law firm entirely outside of your jurisdiction." I leaned 1 inch closer, my voice dropping to a dead flat tone. "There is only one sole beneficiary listed on that trust, Jamari, and there is only one sole trustee legally authorized to manage, distribute, or access those funds. Me." Trent stopped struggling. He went completely limp against the carpet. "The money is not in his bank account, Trent," I whispered. "The money is sitting in an impenetrable legal vault in Delaware. You cannot touch it. Naya cannot touch it. No family court judge in the state of Michigan can ever give you access to it. The $5.6 million is entirely, completely gone." I stood up slowly, brushing a piece of invisible lint off the knee of my pants. I looked down at the broken lawyer on the floor. "You fought a massive, violent war over a completely empty vault, Trent," I said, my voice echoing loudly in the silent room. "You sold your soul for a box with nothing inside it, and your time is officially up." Trent did not scream. He did not cry. He just stared blankly at the plush carpet beneath his face. He realized the absolute totality of his defeat. He was pinned to the floor of a glass tower, completely bankrupt, legally ruined, and waiting for the mafia to come collect a debt he could never pay. I turned away from him and looked at Jamari. The boy had already picked up his faded canvas duffel bag and was waiting patiently by the heavy oak doors. It was time to go home. The two massive corporate security guards hauled Trent up from the plush carpet. They did not try to be gentle. They dragged him backward until his knees buckled and forced him into one of the empty leather chairs at the far end of the mahogany table. Trent was breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. His expensive custom suit was entirely ruined. His face was stained with sweat and tears of absolute panic. The heavy steel handcuffs kept his arms pinned awkwardly behind his back, causing him to slouch forward like a broken doll. The chief executive officer of Apex Dynamics stood up from his chair at the head of the table. He buttoned his suit jacket with slow, deliberate precision. He was a billionaire who dealt with global tech mergers and international corporate law on a daily basis. He did not have any patience for the pathetic, violent display he had just witnessed in his own building. He looked at Trent with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Mr. Sterling," the executive said, his voice echoing coldly across the massive glass boardroom. "You came into my corporate headquarters under the pretense of a legitimate intellectual property transaction. You attempted to sell an asset you did not legally own. You lied to my legal team, and you attempted to use our corporate infrastructure to facilitate a massive financial fraud." Trent tried to speak, but only a pathetic sobbing sound came out of his throat. He shook his head weakly back and forth. The executive did not stop. Furthermore, the executive continued, his tone hardening into solid ice. "You just physically assaulted our lead independent consultant right in the middle of our boardroom. That is a direct violation of the corporate ethics clause embedded in every single contract your law firm holds with Apex Dynamics. Effective immediately, I am completely severing all ties with your firm. The secondary retainer contracts the pending merger negotiations, the legal consultation fees, all of it is permanently nullified. You are completely finished in this city, Mr. Sterling. I will make sure every single corporate board in this state knows exactly what you tried to do here today. No legitimate corporation will ever do business with you again." Trent dropped his head forward, hitting his chin against his chest. He was hyperventilating, his shoulders shaking violently. The prestigious career he had built on lies and manipulation was completely dead. The firm he was so incredibly proud of was effectively bankrupt, and he was facing imminent disbarment all in the span of 30 minutes. But losing his career was no longer his biggest problem. The sudden violent buzzing noise cut through the heavy silence of the room. It was coming from the inside pocket of Trent's ruined suit jacket. The phone vibrated intensely against his chest. It sounded like an angry hornet trapped inside a glass jar. Trent froze. His entire body went completely rigid. He stopped crying. He stopped breathing. He knew exactly who was calling him. He knew exactly what time it was. One of the security guards reached into Trent's pocket and pulled out the vibrating cell phone. The guard looked at the blank screen and then placed the phone face up on the polished mahogany table directly in front of Trent. The screen was flashing brightly. The caller ID did not show a name. It only showed a restricted number. But Trent did not need a name to know who was on the other end of that line. I raised my left arm and slowly pulled back the cuff of my worn leather jacket. I looked at the face of my old analog wristwatch. The second hand ticked past the 12. It was exactly 12:30 in the afternoon. That would be the Russo brothers, I said, my voice perfectly calm, cutting through the tension of the room like a surgical blade. Trent stared at the vibrating phone. His eyes were wide with a terror so deep it looked like it was tearing his soul apart from the inside out. I took a few slow steps toward him, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides. "You see, Trent?" I continued, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "I knew you were trying to close this deal quickly because you had a massive debt. You owed the Russo brothers $3 million, and the absolute deadline was tomorrow. But you made a very critical mistake. You thought you were the only person in Detroit who knew how to leverage a timeline to force a surrender." The phone stopped buzzing for 3 seconds. Then it immediately started buzzing again. The men on the other end of that line were not going to stop calling. "I have a very good friend named DeAndre," I told Trent. "He is a man who knows exactly how to spread a rumor in the right places." Early this morning, DeAndre made a few phone calls to his contacts on the east side. He let the Russo brothers know that you were attempting to close a multi-million-dollar tech deal in secret. He told them you were planning to take the money and flee the country before the deadline. Trent let out a high-pitched gasp. His chest heaved violently as he desperately tried to pull air into his lungs. "No," he whimpered, his voice breaking into 1,000 pieces. "No, you did not. You did not tell them I was here." I looked down at him with absolutely zero pity. "I told them exactly where you would be, Trent. I told them to come to the Apex Dynamics corporate tower. I told them to wait right down there in the main lobby. They have been waiting by the front glass doors since noon. The reality of my words slammed into Trent with the devastating force of a falling building. The mafia was not waiting for him at his luxury penthouse. They were not looking for him at his failing law firm. They were standing downstairs in the marble lobby of this exact building, blocking the only exit. He was entirely trapped in a glass tower, and the Reapers were waiting for him on the ground floor. Trent completely broke. He leaned forward over the mahogany table and started sobbing uncontrollably. It was a pathetic, ugly sound. He cried like a frightened child, realizing the monster in the closet was entirely real. He begged the chief executive officer for help. He begged the corporate lawyers to call the police. He begged the security guards to let him stay in the boardroom forever. "Please!" Trent sobbed, his tears dripping down his nose and splashing onto the polished wood. "Please do not make me go down there. They are going to kill me. They are going to break my legs and throw me in the river. Call the police. Have me arrested right now. Please put me in jail. I will confess to everything. It is better than going down there." The chief executive officer looked at his security team. He did not show an ounce of compassion. "Escort Mr. Sterling out of the building," the executive commanded, his voice completely devoid of any mercy. "Take him down the executive freight elevator and leave him at the front doors. He is no longer our problem." The two massive guards grabbed Trent by his shoulders and hauled him roughly to his feet. Trent kicked and screamed, dragging his expensive Italian shoes across the thick carpet. He pleaded for his life, offering to give them anything they wanted, but the guards ignored him entirely. They dragged him toward the heavy oak doors, pulling him completely out of the boardroom. His desperate, hysterical screams echoed down the long corporate hallway, fading slowly until the heavy steel elevator doors finally closed and silenced him forever. The boardroom was quiet again. The executives began silently gathering their files. The multi-million-dollar transaction was officially over. Then I heard a loud, desperate thump behind me. I turned around slowly. Nia had collapsed entirely onto the floor. She had watched her wealthy husband get dragged away to his inevitable violent doom, and she knew she was completely next. She had co-signed those mafia loans. The Russo brothers knew her face. They knew she was part of the stolen $3 million. Without Trent to hide behind, she was completely exposed. Nia crawled across the plush carpet. She did not care about ruining her expensive designer dress. She did not care about her pride or her dignity in front of the wealthy corporate lawyers. She reached out with trembling, manicured hands and grabbed the fabric of my pants. She gripped my legs so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. "Dad," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup and leaving dark streaks on her cheeks. "Dad, you have to save me. Please, Daddy, please. You cannot let them do this to me." I looked down at the top of her head. I felt the heavy weight of her hands on my legs, but I felt absolutely no emotional connection to the woman kneeling on the floor, weeping at my feet. "Please," Nia begged, her voice completely hysterical and broken. "I do not want the millions anymore. I do not want the house. Just give me $100,000, Dad. Just enough to pay the interest to the mob. Just enough to buy my life back so I can run away and hide. You have $5.6 million. $100,000 is absolutely nothing to you. Please protect your little girl." She looked up at me. Her face was a mask of pure, desperate terror. She was trying to play the role of the innocent little girl who needed her strong father to chase the monsters away. She thought that because we shared the same blood, I would automatically reach down and pull her out of the fire she had started herself. She wanted me to use the money my autistic grandson had earned through his own brilliant suffering to pay off a mafia debt she had incurred out of pure selfish greed. She wanted me to reward her ultimate betrayal. I looked at her hands gripping my clothes. I looked at the corporate lawyers watching the brutal family scene unfold with quiet fascination. Then I looked all the way across the massive room at Jamari. The boy was standing quietly by the door, holding his faded canvas duffel bag tightly against his chest, waiting for me to take him home to a safe, quiet place. I turned my cold eyes back down to Nia. The time for talking was completely over. The downfall was absolute, and I was not going to stop it. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom closed, and the muffled sounds of Trent screaming in the hallway completely disappeared. The silence that fell over the massive glass room was absolute and suffocating. The chief executive officer and the sharp corporate lawyers sat perfectly still at the polished mahogany table. They were wealthy people who dealt with numbers and contracts, but they were completely paralyzed by the raw human destruction unfolding right in front of them. down on the plush carpet, my biological daughter, Nia, was still gripping the fabric of my pants. Her tears were soaking into the worn material. She was sobbing loudly, her shoulders shaking with the terrifying realization that her wealthy husband was gone and the mafia was coming for her next. She looked up at me with her makeup ruined and her expensive designer dress crumpled on the floor. She kept begging me to save her. She kept using the word family as if it was a magical spell that could instantly erase all the terrible things she had done. She told me she was just a victim. She swore she did not know how evil Trent really was. She promised that if I just gave her a fraction of the millions my grandson had earned, she would run away and start a new honest life. I looked down at her, and I tried to find a single trace of the little girl I had raised in Detroit. I tried to feel a spark of fatherly instinct that would make me reach down and pull her up from the floor. But there was absolutely nothing left inside my chest. The space where my love for her used to be was completely empty. I looked at her crying face, and my mind flashed back through the last 11 years. I remembered the cold winter nights when the power went out and I had to wrap Jamari in 3 heavy blankets to keep him from shivering. I remembered the days I worked double shifts at the bus depot with a terrible pain in my knees just to pay for his sensory therapy sessions. I remembered the absolute silence of the house on holidays when she never bothered to call or send a single card. She did not care if we were starving or freezing or dying. She only came back when she smelled the money. She brought a slick corporate lawyer and a police escort to rip a terrified autistic boy out of his only safe space just to pay off a gambling debt to a local crime syndicate. That is not family, that is a parasite. Dad, please say something. Nia whimpered, her voice barely a whisper now. Please, do not let them kill me. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream at her the way Trent had screamed at Jamari. I slowly reached my rough right hand into the front pocket of my worn leather jacket. I pulled out my old, faded wallet. The corporate lawyers watched my hands, closely wondering if I was going to pull out a checkbook or a corporate credit card. I opened the wallet and looked inside. I bypassed the shiny plastic cards that were completely frozen by the family court judge. I reached into the cash slot. I pulled out the exact same money I had staring back at me when I stood in the pharmacy just yesterday morning, unable to afford my grandson's medication. 2 $10 bills, 1 $20 bill, and 2 crumpled singles. $42. I pulled the $20 bill out of the stack and put the wallet back into my pocket. I looked down at the $20 bill in my calloused hand. Yesterday, this piece of paper was a symbol of my absolute desperation. Trent had engineered my poverty to force me into submission. Now it was the only thing standing between my estranged daughter and the violent men waiting for her in the lobby. I let go of the paper bill. It fluttered slowly through the quiet air of the boardroom and landed gently on the thick carpet right next to Nia's trembling knees. She stopped crying for a second and looked down at the $20 with complete confusion. "Take that $20, Nia," I said, my voice dropping to a dead, flat monotone that carried no warmth and no mercy. "Walk out the back emergency exit of this building. Take an Uber directly to the downtown police station. Walk up to the front desk and ask them to place you in protective custody. Tell them everything you and your husband did with the stolen client escrow funds and tell them the Russo brothers are actively hunting you." Nia stared at the $20 bill like it was a venomous snake. She shook her head frantically, refusing to accept the reality of what I was saying. "No, Dad," she gasped, her hands reaching out for me again. "A $20 bill cannot save me. I need the money to pay the debt. The police cannot protect me forever. You have millions of dollars. You can fix this right now." I stepped back, forcing her hands to fall away from my pants. She hit the floor hard, her palms pressing into the carpet. "I am not going to fix anything for you, Nia," I told her, staring down at her broken form. "You made your choices. You chose the designer clothes and the luxury penthouse. You chose to sign those loans. You chose to treat your own son like a piece of property to be traded for your survival. Now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. You do not get a single penny of his money." The chief executive officer and his legal team remained absolutely silent. They were bearing witness to a judgment that was far more severe than any corporate lawsuit or federal indictment. They were watching a father completely sever the bloodline. Nia began to hyperventilate, her chest heaved, and she let out a long, desperate wail of pure terror. "But I have nothing," she cried, burying her face in her hands. "They will find me, Alonzo. They will hunt me down and they will kill me." I crouched down slightly, bringing my face closer to hers so she could hear my final words with absolute clarity. Listen to me very carefully, Naya, I whispered, my voice colder than the Detroit winter wind. If you manage to survive the Russo brothers, and if you ever decide to come looking for another payday, do not even think about approaching my house. If you ever come within 100 miles of my grandson again, I will not call the police. I will not hire a lawyer. I will take a fraction of that $5.6 million, and I will personally buy your debt from the Russo brothers. And then I will collect it myself. Nia froze completely. The wailing stopped instantly. She looked up at me and saw the absolute deadly serious truth in my eyes. She knew I was not bluffing. The old bus dispatcher who had quietly raised her son was gone. I was a man who had completely dismantled her powerful husband in less than 24 hours without throwing a single punch. She finally realized that the most dangerous person in her life was not the mafia waiting downstairs. It was the father standing right in front of her. She shrank back, pulling her knees to her chest, completely broken and utterly terrified. I stood up to my full height. I turned my back on my own flesh and blood without a single ounce of regret. I walked away from the weeping woman on the floor and turned my attention to the only person in the entire building who actually mattered. Jamari was standing quietly by the heavy oak doors. He was holding his faded canvas duffel bag tightly against his chest. His posture was stiff, and his eyes were darting slightly, trying to process the heavy emotional atmosphere of the room. But he was not having a meltdown. He was safe. The laptop was closed, the code was transferred, and the threat had been completely neutralized. I walked across the plush carpet until I was standing right in front of him. I looked at the brilliant 17-year-old boy who had unknowingly built a digital empire from my old blueprints. He had survived the chaotic disruption of his routine. He had survived the terrible penthouse and the screaming lawyer. He had held his ground and waited for me just like he promised, with those 3 taps on his leg. I did not hug him because I knew he did not want to be touched that way right now. Instead, I gently placed my hand on his right shoulder, providing the firm, deep pressure that he found comforting. He looked up at me, his dark eyes locking onto mine. The tension in his shoulders slowly melted away. "Let us go home, son," I said, my voice instantly softening into a warm, steady tone. "I am making oatmeal." Jamari blinked twice. A tiny, imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth. He nodded his head once. He adjusted the strap of his faded duffel bag and turned toward the doors. We walked out of the massive glass boardroom together. We walked past the chief executive officer, who gave us a silent nod of profound respect. We walked past the sharp corporate lawyers who parted ways to let us through. We did not look back at the beautiful panoramic view of the city or the polished mahogany table, and we did not look back at the weeping woman curled up on the floor. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind us, sealing Nia inside her self-made tomb. We walked down the long, quiet hallway toward the elevators, leaving the corporate world and all its toxic greed entirely behind. The war was officially over. We had won. And we had done it with exactly $42 and the absolute unbreakable bond of true loyalty. We did not buy a mansion in the suburbs. People always assume that when you come into millions of dollars, the first thing you do is pack up your bags and move to a gated community. They think you are supposed to buy a sprawling estate with a heated swimming pool and a driveway long enough to park 6 luxury cars. But people who think like that do not understand what a home actually means. And they certainly do not understand how an autistic mind works. Moving Jamari to a massive empty mansion would have been a terrible mistake. It would have completely destroyed the careful routine we spent 11 long years building. The sudden change in environment, the new smells, the unfamiliar echoes in empty hallways, it would have sent him into a massive sensory regression. So we stayed exactly where we were. We drove my old Ford pickup truck back to our quiet neighborhood on the east side of Detroit. But things are very different now. The fear of survival is completely gone. I paid the county property tax bill the very next morning in cash. We used the first distribution from the blind trust to completely secure our fortress. I hired a local crew to tear off the rotting shingles and build a brand new, heavily insulated roof. I had the cracked driveway poured with fresh, smooth concrete. I upgraded the perimeter with a high-end, discreet security system. The house still looks like a humble, working-class home from the outside. It blends in perfectly with the rest of the neighborhood. But inside, it is a completely different world. Jamari's bedroom is no longer a chaotic mess of tangled wires and exposed motherboards. It is a sanctuary that rivals a government intelligence agency. I knocked down the wall between his room and the spare guest room to double his square footage. We brought in industrial-grade climate control systems to keep the air perfectly cool and constantly circulating. The old pawnshop laptops are completely gone. They are replaced by massive, sleek black server racks that hum with a deep, quiet rhythm. The mattress is no longer on the floor. He has a custom-built sensory bed with a weighted canopy that blocks out all the light and noise when he needs to reset his nervous system. He sits in a highly advanced ergonomic chair surrounded by 6 curved monitors, writing code that is actively changing the world. He is still quiet. He still eats plain oatmeal with cinnamon every single morning. But the absolute terror is completely gone from his dark eyes. He knows that his sanctuary is permanent and can never be taken away from him. As for the people who tried to destroy us, the universe has a very precise way of balancing the scales. Trent Sterling never made it back to his luxury penthouse that day. The moment the Apex security guards dumped him out of the freight elevator, the Russo brothers were waiting in the marble lobby. But Trent got incredibly lucky. And by lucky, I mean he chose the only option that would keep him breathing. He saw the mobsters waiting by the glass doors, and he ran directly toward 2 Detroit police officers who were patrolling the financial district. He threw himself on the hood of their police cruiser, sobbing hysterically, and loudly confessed to massive federal wire fraud. He begged them to arrest him. He practically put the steel handcuffs on his own wrists. The Federal Bureau of Investigation raided his downtown law firm the very next morning. They uncovered a massive web of deceit. They found the empty client escrow accounts, the fraudulent offshore cryptocurrency transfers, and a dozen other white-collar crimes Trent had committed to maintain his illusion of extreme wealth. Trent did not even try to fight the charges. He took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy public trial. He is currently serving a 15-year sentence in a medium-security federal penitentiary. It is a long, terrible stretch of time for a man who used to wear custom-tailored suits and drink expensive imported scotch. But ironically, the federal prison is the only place on earth where the Russo brothers cannot reach him. He traded his freedom for his life. I saw a picture of him from his sentencing hearing. He was wearing a baggy orange jumpsuit. His slick hair was entirely gone, and he looked like a hollow, empty shell. He lost his prestigious firm, his luxury condo, his expensive cars, and his dignity. He is exactly what he tried to make me. He is an invisible, broken man with absolutely no future. My biological daughter, Nia, did not fare much better. When the federal agents froze Trent's assets, they froze hers right along with them. She had eagerly co-signed the loans for the luxury cars and the massive penthouse. She was completely legally tethered to his sinking ship. The bank seized absolutely everything. They took her designer coats, her expensive jewelry, and her imported shoes. She tried to go back to the wealthy suburban friends she used to impress, but nobody answers the phone when a massive federal fraud investigation is attached to your name. The last I heard from DeAndre, she is living in a tiny, cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the dangerous outskirts of the city. Because her car was repossessed, she has to take the city bus to work every single morning. There is a deep poetic justice in that. She has to ride the exact same buses I spent 40 years dispatching to earn an honest living. She wears a cheap polyester uniform and works a minimum wage job at a commercial laundry facility. She spends 10 hours a day folding heavy wet towels in a room filled with hot, suffocating steam. Her hands are completely ruined by the harsh industrial bleach. She has tried to call my cell phone a dozen times over the last few months. She leaves long crying voicemails begging for a second chance, begging for just a little bit of financial help. I listen to the voicemails while I drink my morning coffee, and then I press the delete button. The line I drew in the corporate boardroom was absolute. Some bridges should never be rebuilt once they are burned to the ground. It is a quiet Tuesday morning. The sun is just starting to rise over Detroit, casting a pale golden light across my new concrete driveway. I'm sitting on my front porch in a sturdy new wooden rocking chair holding a hot cup of black coffee. The neighborhood is just waking up. I can hear the distant rumble of the city buses starting their early routes. For 40 long years, I controlled those routes. I made sure every massive machine got exactly where it was supposed to go. I managed the chaos of the city. Now I just sit here and enjoy the profound, absolute peace. Down the narrow hallway, I can hear the soft, rhythmic clicking of Jamari's mechanical keyboard. He is working on a brand new algorithm. He told me through his text-to-speech tablet that it is a program designed to help hospitals filter out the chaotic, overlapping noises of emergency rooms so patients suffering from trauma can rest peacefully. He is using his brilliant mind to heal the broken parts of the world, and I am using everything I have to protect him while he does it. We do not need a lot of words to understand each other. When he takes a break, he will come out to the kitchen, tap the counter twice, and I will have his oatmeal ready. That is our routine. That is our perfect, quiet life. I look at the empty street and I think about the long, violent journey that brought us here. I think about the people who look at a tired old man living on a fixed pension and see an easy target. I think about the wealthy, arrogant predators who believe that a law degree and a custom suit give them the right to steal from the vulnerable. They build their empires on greed and manipulation, and they completely forget that the strongest foundations are built on sacrifice and silent endurance. I look directly at you now. The people listening to my story from wherever you are in the world. I want you to remember exactly how this ended. I want you to carry this lesson with you when you deal with your own family and your own struggles. Blood does not make you family. Loyalty does. They thought because I was old and black I was invisible. They thought because my grandson was quiet he was stupid. We let them think that. Because a lion does not need to roar when the trap is already set. The lesson learned. The greatest lesson from this story is that true family is never defined by bloodlines. It is forged through unwavering loyalty and sacrifice. Toxic people, even your own flesh and blood, will only see you as a resource to exploit when it benefits them. Furthermore, never underestimate the quiet ones or the elderly. Arrogance often dismisses age and silence as weakness, but as Alonzo proved true, power doesn't need to scream. It observes, it plans, and it strikes with absolute precision. When predators try to manipulate the system against you, don't panic. Stay calm, hold your ground, and let their own blind greed become the trap that destroys them. Call to action, CTA. If you believe that true family is built on loyalty rather than blood, hit that subscribe button, share this video, and let me know in the comments how you handle toxic people in your own life.